If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. For those who have witnessed or experienced eerie, terrifying events, what's the creepiest, scariest story you have? When I was 14, my mom and I lived in an apartment, which was. Shortly after moving in, things went weird. One night I was fixing my bicycle tire, so I had it upside down in the center of the living room. My mother was in the kitchen. I was taking a break and started playing some video games. I heard a noise behind me, turned around, and the front door opened slowly all on its own. Between me and the door, the pedals on my bicycle started moving, and the tires started spinning toward me. I called my mother softly so she could see this happening. Once she figured out why I was being quiet, she said, "Hello there, welcome to our home." The bicycle tire stops. Totally still. For about 15 awkward seconds, we both just looked at each other and then went back to the bicycle. Suddenly, the tires began spinning in the opposite direction, so fast that the bicycle fell over, and then the door slammed shut. It was definitely spooky. But over the next few months, our lives were a mess. I got injured every time I rode my bicycle, so I stopped. My mother began to have visions. She disappeared for a weekend, and when she came back, her clothes were torn and dirty, and our car was missing. My assumption was a drinking binge, but she said she was accosted by a cult of black-robed figures and tossed into a pit. The level of detail she recounted made me think it might have actually happened. After that, she locked me in the apartment. She drew crosses on the walls and would not let me leave. It was not until my school asked for a welfare check that anybody knew how awful it had become. I ended up in foster care until my mother was able to get out of the hospital. Don't ever, even jokingly, invite something you can't see into your home. When I was a little girl, I was playing in my room one morning with my sister. I looked out my window and saw a man staring in at us. I told my sister to leave my room and ran to get my father. He didn't believe me and thought I was crazy. Needless to say, I had an awful difficult time sleeping that night. Throughout my childhood, I'd hear what sounded like footsteps outside at night or my parents' car doors opening long after they had gone to sleep. Several years later, I looked at our house on maps. I always assumed we lived by ourselves in the woods, far from anyone else. It turns out there was a small house that looked like it was being lived in only a few hundred yards in the woods from us. My family was less skeptical of my crazy stories after I showed them that. When I was about 6 years old, I was at my grandparents' house for the weekend. They had a massive garden that I would play in for hours at a time. One day I was out there, out of view of my grandparents, and a man climbed over the fence, crouched down behind some planters, and was staring at me. I was frozen because he could see me and he knew I could see him, and he just stared at me while crouching. He looked scruffy and unhinged, and he was scratching his arms. He kissed towards me a few times, too, and he was mumbling to himself. My grandpa happened to come over, saw me standing there like a statue, and then saw the man. He jumped because it caught him off guard, but to my amazement, he just sprinted towards the man and tackled him down to the ground. I screamed, and my grandma ran outside and ran back in to call the police. The whole time he was looking at me, he literally wouldn't stop staring at me, to the point where my grandpa was getting very angry and looked like he was close to choking him or something. The police came super quick, and that was that. I'm 30, and it still creeps me the duck out. This is my dad's story, not mine. In the 80s, my dad was in the Peace Corps and lived in Sierra Leone for 3 years. He had a motorcycle, or some sort of motorbike, at least at one point, and would ride around the roads when he had free time. One day he's riding a dirt road that snakes around a small mountainside or hillside past some construction works. About half a mile after the road work, he sees a man on the side of this dirt road on the mountain or hillside, just laughing his butt off. And he was blue. Not like painted blue, but blue. At first, my dad rode on, thinking nothing of it. And then it sank in, that he saw a blue dude sitting on the side of a dirt road, laughing wildly. He turned around and rode back to where he saw the blue dude, and there was nothing there. He kept retracing his path beyond the roadwork and never saw the blue guy again. Later that day, he went back to the village he was living in at the time and told the locals about what he had seen. The locals all laughed and said, essentially, "No, you didn't. White men can't see devils." When I was 15, my family went on a cross-country trip, and one night we camped in the Grand Canyon. We went to a ranger lecture around 6 p.m., this is summer, so it was still pretty light when we were walking back. We went off the trail as a shortcut, and after walking a ways, we noticed a light up ahead. As we drew closer, there was a man sitting at a desk in the woods with a lantern. Just a full wood office-sized desk in the middle of the woods. I distinctly remember that he had long sideburns and felt like he was dressed like a man from the 1800s. My dad backed us down towards the trail, and we went on our way. The man never made a peep, looked up, or acknowledged us. There were 2 adults and 3 teenagers, and we all remember the event really clearly. I don't believe in ghosts or spirits, but I have no explanation for what I saw. As I got older, I figured I was misremembering, but everyone else in my family says they saw the same thing. I once had a dream. I was walking solo down a familiar dirt path towards a wooded area. Side note, the path felt familiar to me in the dream. I had never been down this path before. As I walked toward the wooded area, the feeling of familiarity changed, and the path ended at an old abandoned cemetery under the tree canopy. The familiarity suggested the path continued and the cemetery should not be there. I was drawn into the cemetery toward a specific grave. The detail was vivid. There was an old stone bench next to a sunken grave. The headstone had an angel on top. The remaining wing had a pine needle dangling off, hanging from a cobweb, drifting in the breeze. It was peaceful and quiet. I immediately woke up and felt like the dream was calling me back. I felt oddly connected. The jolt from waking up was so startling that I decided to write the dream down. Fast forward a couple of years. I was considering buying a house with my girlfriend. After we reached a house we were considering, the realtor called and said she was running late. While waiting, we walked outside of the house. Behind the house, we noticed a path past the overgrown grass going into some woods. To kill time, we decided to walk the path to the trees. While walking along and enjoying the sun on my face, I was hit with an intense feeling of déjà vu. I knew this place. As we reached the woods, there it was, the abandoned cemetery. It was the same cemetery as in my dream. I told my girlfriend I'd visited this place in a dream and described specific details, down to the pine needle. She thought I was trying to pull a stupid prank until she saw the sunken grave, missing wing, stone bench, and even the pine needle hanging off the angel's wing. She immediately walked back toward our car. The entire experience was a copy and paste of my dream, with the exception of my girlfriend being present. Later that day, we were back at my house. She asked me how I knew all that detail. I let her read the dream I wrote down. I described the path, trees, cemetery, and weather perfectly. She refused to ever talk about the experience again. That was around 20 years ago. The experience still haunts me to this day. I went camping with some friends on a hill a few kilometers out in the woods from one of the guys' houses. There's a few hiking and four-wheeling trails in the area that lead up to the hill, so it's known by the locals. It was about midnight, we had a fire going and were just sitting around having a good time. Then the guy, there were 4 of us, sitting opposite me yelled, "Who are you?" I turn around, and there's this man, about 6 feet tall, staring at us from the edge of the woods with a big rock in his hand. One guy knocked an arrow in the compound bow we had, the guy across from me grabbed the hatchet, and I pulled the knife off my belt. We had no clue what we were doing, but the guy wouldn't say anything to us. He eventually just backpedaled into the woods. No sleep was had that night, and we kept a very large fire going. This one isn't about me but about my dad. Until this day I have only met a handful of people from his side of the family because of how dangerous and crazy they are. But one story he told me that always managed to freak me out was when he was about 10 years old. He lived in a small town in Florida, and his aunt was said to be a witch. He would visit, and her sons, who were in their mid-teens, would torment and beat my dad while he was there. This was back in the 80s, and all their houses just had miles of land around them, and the aunt lived at the edge of town, right beside a forest. The forest always gave my dad a weird vibe, so he never ventured into it. One night, when he was over, he was left alone with just his cousins while his aunt and mom were away. His cousins, wanting to scare him, talked about an evil witch who lived in the forest who liked to eat children and said how she came out on a full moon at night looking for lost kids. My dad wasn't scared by the story, so his cousins decided to lock him outside the house when it was dark. He sat out there for a bit before hearing the shriek come from the forest. It freaked him out a bit, but he figured it had to be an animal. It happened again, and then again. And then suddenly he heard what he described as an almost human but animalistic sounding shriek that was so loud it made my ears hurt. You know how animals try to intimidate people before getting into a fight? He said that was what the thing felt like it was doing. And then he saw 2 glowing pairs of eyes staring at him several feet away at the edge of the forest. That's when he started banging on the back door, screaming to be let inside. The cousins finally let him back in and went, "See, we told you," and then locked the door and told my dad not to go back outside until his mom came to get him. He noticed one of them holding a gun in his hand. I asked if he actually believed there was something out there that night, or if someone was hiding in the forest trying to mess with him. He said he'd never heard a noise like that or felt the same sense of dread as he did that night. Not only that, but his cousins were very tense that night and kept the loaded gun out. A creepy intersection near my house that, about 3 months ago, started to be torn down for being too dangerous was replaced by a roundabout. The strange thing is, it was a normal intersection with 4 directions, 2 lanes in, 2 lanes out, and dedicated left turn lanes. Except, just about every week, someone crashes there. Every month, we'd hear of a near fatality or worse. The police couldn't figure it out, so they started to petition for them to change it. They changed the light pattern and reduced speeds, which brought total crashes down, but here's the duck thing, serious injuries tripled. It got so bad that they posted cops permanently to monitor the intersection, and what they noticed was that if they watched the intersection nonstop, nothing would happen, but the instant you'd take your eyes off it, someone would speed through a red light or make a left turn on red. They then finally attempted one last thing, remove 2 of the lights in favor of stop signs on one of the roads. The first day, there was a multi-car pileup. The second day, there was a minivan rollover. The third day, the mayor's daughter hit someone going 50. Day 4, the intersection was closed for construction. I've seen a lot of weird things, but the one that I can't wrap my head around is when I saw these 2 women in the middle of nowhere. We jokingly refer to them as time travelers, but we have no logical explanation for how they got there. My buddy and I used to go to the mountains of West Virginia, the Allegheny Plateau at Dolly Sods, and do camping or run trips over the weekend off-season. This area is extremely remote, and there is only a single seasonal road, which is barricaded off all winter. We had camped overnight as high as we could drive and went for a run in the afternoon. We started at maybe 2K or 2.5K of elevation at the start of a snowstorm. Nobody was around for miles in early February. It was months before they reopened the road and campsites. The area was previously logged, and there's a plateau, so the wind and snow can whip through really fast. It was maybe 25 degrees at the start, but it dropped fast. We made it 2 to 3 miles up the road, close to 4,000 feet, when suddenly we saw them come out of the woods and approach us. One of the girls was wearing heeled boots and a thin, black, unzipped leather jacket with jeans. The other was wearing jeans with an equally thin coat, but at least didn't have heels. One had a small purse and the other a clutch, but no gloves, hats, or, better yet, camping equipment of any sort. They asked us which way to go to the parking lot, but we were 4K feet up, 3 miles from the road we came from, and it's 3 miles to the nearest campsite in the opposite direction. That campsite is maybe at the halfway point in the road, so it would be like 9+ miles to road access from the north from where we were. There are no other entry points, and there are certainly no parking lots anywhere nearby. Confused, we directed them down the mountain the way we came and warned them it was a few miles. As we ran off, we started trying to figure out where they came from. It was just so bizarre to see people dressed to go to the bar in such a hostile environment. We figured we would catch them on the way back in. When we turned around to head back down the mountain, the snow picked up like crazy. We must have gotten at least 6 inches in the hour it took us, and it dropped into the teens or lower. We saw their footprints at first, but there was so much snow cover that we lost track, and there was no one at the bottom near the road. It's been years, and we've been back several times, but we still have no idea how they got there. It breaks my brain every time I recall it. It was 1984, I was 15 years old and was alone at my older sister's house. It was late morning, I had just gotten out of the shower, still wrapped in a towel, when I heard a noise outside. I looked out a window and watched a complete stranger tie the doorknob of the main entrance to the railing of the deck with a rope I used to walk the dog with. He then leaned a mop that was on the deck against the door. I called my sister, told her what happened, got dressed, got the heck out of the house through a different door, and hid in the bushes until the police arrived. The house was somewhat remote, with no close neighbors. I found out later that the door he tied up was unlocked. I had no clue how long he had been lurking around before I knew of his presence. To this day, we have no idea who that was or what his motives were. It was beyond creepy and definitely unexplained. When I was a kid in the 1970s, I lived out in the boonies between Cleveland and Akron, Ohio. We had a large house sitting on several acres of land, most of it heavily wooded. There was a large hill in the front yard, sloping downward away from the front of the house. In late November, we had enough snow so that my brother and I could go sledding. I hopped onto my trusty flexible flyer runner sled and bolted down the hill. My brother was still on top of the hill as I descended. After I came to a complete stop, I began to dig around for a mitten that fell off. I didn't dig far until I saw light peeking out from the ground, shining upward at me. I cleared away some more snow and couldn't believe what I saw. I could see daylight. Not only that, but I could see about 50 feet down and make out a couple of houses and a street, all through an 8-inch hole that I dug in my front yard. There was apparently a whole neighborhood that I could see through this hole, all below me, through this tiny passage. This wasn't an area of the country with any mountains, cliffs, or overhangs. No, this was a world that was somehow visible in a place that should have been invisible, which was within 50 feet of dirt and rock, covered in snow. My brother then descends down the hill on his sled as I'm sitting there stunned. I turned away for an instant to look at him, then looked back. The world I'd discovered was now gone. I could now only see dormant grass underneath the snow that I had previously cleared away. The next day, I sledded down the hill again and looked in the same place for the mystery neighborhood, but I never saw it again. The only person I ever told was my wife, and it was many years later. She, of course, looked at me like I was nuts, and who could blame her? I once saw a kid in a dark alley who became me on a late night walk home. I grew up in Mexico. Tiny town in the middle of nowhere before the gang/cartel violence got bad. It was pretty safe, everyone knew everyone in town, so kids were allowed out at any time. It was the middle of summer too, so I definitely stayed up way past midnight playing soccer with some friends and cousins. My entire life, there had been an abandoned house about half a block down from my house, which I had to walk by. I don't remember exactly how old I was or what the weather was like, but I do remember there was no moon or it was cloudy. The only light comes from street lights. The stretch between the corner house at the opposite end of the street where I lived and 2 houses down from mine was always dark due to the street lights not working. At the abandoned house, there was a huge mesquite tree. They can grow incredibly huge, that would always block all light from shining down on that house. Making things even creepier was the fact that the house itself looked like your typical haunted house, with the windows smashed and everything falling apart. The house itself had no real fence at the sides but rather 7 or 8 foot tall walls from the houses on either side, with a carved hill behind it. In short, it is very creepy and very dark. Being a kid, I would usually stick to the opposite side of the street, trying my best to stay away from that house. This particular time, it was not possible due to some construction going on at a nearby house. Piles of materials were left on the sidewalk. Very common thing to do in Mexico. The neighbors' cars also blocked the sidewalk, so I was forced to walk in the middle of the street. As I walked in front of the house, I heard a voice trying to catch my attention. A hey kid finally made me stop and turn to face the house. Standing next to the house in the dark was a random kid I had never seen before. He kept calling for me and asking to play. I was frozen in fear. All I could do was say no over and over again. I couldn't move, and I even forgot to breathe. I'm not sure why I didn't notice right away, but he was perfectly visible even though the house itself was in darkness. After a few more attempts from the kid, who looked about my age, by the way, he or she took a few steps towards me. As he did, he changed somehow and looked exactly like me, but with anger in his eyes. The kid's voice deepened, and he shouted at me to go play with him. It almost sounded like he was frustrated. I have no idea what happened, but all of a sudden there was a sound nearby, somewhere behind me. His gaze finally broke contact with mine, and I just ran. As I ran away, I felt somehow lighter, and the usual sounds of the night began to come back. I didn't dare look behind me out of fear that I would see that thing again. I don't know what it was, but I never saw it again. Though I did refuse to walk by that house for a long time after. I would instead walk around the block. The only reason I didn't do it that night was because it was incredibly late, and I was trying to get home quickly. I have a cabin deep in the woods of rural Spotsylvania, Virginia. My handicapped son was sleeping on the main floor, my wife in the loft, and me on the pull-out bed in the basement because I'd be getting up early to hunt and didn't want to wake anyone. I woke at 1 a.m., and the recessed light over my head was now on in my face. I walked to the control panel, turned it off, and quietly said, "I dare you to do that again," as I went back to bed. I wake up at 2:30, and the light's on my face again. I was a bit surprised. But get up to turn it off and whisper, "If you want to impress me, turn on the light over the pool table next time," and go back to bed. I'm then awakened at 4 a.m. to find the pool table lights turned on. Okay, now it's got my attention. I get up and turn off the light, and this time I whisper, "I'm impressed, but can you do it again before I get up at 5:30? Alarm clock goes off, no lights on. Phew. I said, "I knew you couldn't do it," as I went upstairs with my phone light to grab something I needed for hunting. I come back down, and sure enough, the pool table light is now turned on again. All I could say was, "Okay, you win." I believe. I decided to ask whomever it was to keep us all safe and warn me of anything hazardous coming our way. Not so scary, I suppose. I don't know why I took this so calmly. We've got graves in the woods nearby, Civil War engagements all around, etc., but I've been able to keep it cool. So far. I had a bit of a spiritual awakening last year. After that, I'd wake up to figures in my room. They were typically family members, whom I didn't even live with at the time. My brother was the first. I saw him clear as day, and he was swaying a bit. I got up and kept blinking. The whole experience lasted maybe 30 seconds. I didn't experience sleep paralysis, as I wasn't in any way paralyzed. I finally said, "What the duck?" and turned on my lamp. Gone. The last time I saw my dad, he was in my doorway. Wouldn't go away. I did a ballsy thing and got up, closed the door, the image didn't go away when I walked up to it, and went back to bed. I haven't had a single issue since. I had a very weird experience in the woods as a kid. I had a friend there to confirm. I saw a pitch black enormous wolf running between trees and then poof, gone. I was terrified, and I slept with my lights on for probably 2 months. This is a very weird occurrence. Me and my 2 cousins, twin girls, were walking home from fishing in my neighborhood. I was 8, and they were 10. I grew up in South Florida, where it rains frequently and often very hard. So, conveniently, it started pouring rain, and we sprinted to my house. When we got to the house, the door was locked, and we began knocking with no response. My parents were having a party, so the fact that nobody responded was odd. This is where it gets weird. I don't know if anyone else here felt this as a child, but we all became inexplicably scared. To the point where the twins were crying. I don't know if it was just childish intuition or the peculiarity of no one answering the door, but our unanimous fear was very strange and unforgettable. As the pouring rain continued to come down, I knocked on the door again and screamed for my parents. As I did, we all heard a voice saying, "You can come over here." A small child's voice. The 3 of us all looked around for the speaker but saw no one. This made matters worse. We all began frantically pounding on the door. We heard the voice again. "Come over here." We saw no one again. At this point, we all lost it, and I joined the twins in the act of sobbing like a baby. We then heard the voice a 3rd time. "Don't be scared." I couldn't stand at the door for 1 second longer. I ran to the side of my house and climbed over the fence to find the entirety of my family sitting on our back patio, enjoying my parents' party. My dad ran up to me and asked what was wrong, and I couldn't come up with how to explain what had just happened. Me and he went through the house and opened the front door for the twins, who were still sobbing. The odd thing is that we never really explained what had so spooked anyone else there. We're 25 and 27 now and very close still. We brought this story up last month after having a few beers. We still don't really know what happened on that day, but we were all unanimous in remembering it as one of the scariest things that ever happened to us. I was born and raised in North Dakota. Back when I was in high school, a group of us would research murders that occurred in the county. We'd then go out to find the scenes and film the exploration at night. This was about 2 years before Blair Witch. It was something to do while we got wasted on shitty beer and teenage bullshit. Eventually we ran out of places to go. North Dakota equals few people, few murders, and got really good at finding abandoned rural farmsteads by driving dirt roads and looking for the signs. Rut roads, deliberate tree groves, and old mailbox posts were common markers. We were out looking when we spotted a tree grove that was out of place, sure sign, drove through the field, and discovered an old, but not too old, house. It had padlocks on the outside doors that were knocked off pretty easily. We dispatched them and entered the kitchen. There were 6 of us, all with flashlights, and we lit up the kitchen/dining area fairly easily. The table was the first thing you noticed, and it was strange because of how normal it looked. It was set for a meal, and not a bowl was out of place. The only thing was that we'd been in dozens of these houses, and place setting was a first. Especially unbroken ones. As we investigated the area, we found the fridge had the disgusting remnants of a full stock, and the cupboards were full of canned and dry foods. This was also a first. One guy found mail on the counter from early June 1978, and another found a creepiest TV guide in the living room with UFOs on the cover. All the family photos were hanging up. Mom, Dad, Bro, and Sis in their 1970s glory. The furniture was dusty but in good condition. Closets were full. Everything was totally normal. Walking down the hall and through the doorway, I prayed I wouldn't act like a pussycat in front of my friends. I shouldn't have been concerned because the others were as scared as I was. The room itself opened up to the left of the doorframe, and centered on the right side of the room was a queen-sized bed. Propped up on pillows, with the blanket drawn to the waist, arms on top of the blanket, and worst of all, head turned slightly so it was looking you straight in the eyes when you entered the room, was a life-sized porcelain doll. Snow white skin, jet black hair, cold dead eyes. The dead eyes lit up with our flashlights. Like she was waiting for us. If the head hadn't been turned, I could excuse it, but it was turned. Ready for when we walked in. I'm ready for 20 years. Hasty ducking exits were made down the stairs and into the car. It was during the ride that we started to get even more creeped out when we realized that, even though the house had been abandoned, someone had taken the time to set up that goddamn doll. Not packing food, clothes, or family photos. Setting up the doll was one of the last things done in this house. We researched their names, but got nothing. There was no tragic car accident. There was no grisly massacre. There is no extended family. Just a tacky time capsule in the middle of nowhere. We found out that the county had taken possession of the land for non-payment of taxes, explaining the locks, but never tracked down any further information on what happened to them. Or why did they leave that ducking doll? A few years ago, I took my parents' dog, Simba, for a walk in a forested area I'd never been before. It was a bit of a drive from the small rural town my parents lived in, down an unsealed road. Simba was his usual boisterous self, always deliriously eager to go for a walk. The first half of the walk went perfectly fine. I followed a creek for a while. We got to the edge of the forest and found ourselves in an open field, all farmland. So we turned around and started walking back to the car. About halfway back, I saw another track, which I could see through the trees, leading to a very lovely, picturesque clearing in the forest next to a waterhole. I decided to go take a look. Just as I got to the clearing, I had the worst, creepiest feeling wash over me. The someone just walked on my grave feeling. Really creepy vibes. That clearing felt plain wrong. Evil even. There wasn't anyone there, but it felt like we were being watched by something. Whatever I felt, Simba felt it 10 times worse. He started whining and staring round and round, pulling on the leash to lead me away from the clearing. I could see in his eyes that he was terrified. He was a big dog, a ridgeback/mastiff cross, weighing close to 60 kilograms. Very intimidating looking, but in truth, an absolute softie. Whatever was in that clearing was able to scare a dog that size. I let go of the leash, and Simba bounded away, then returned to see if I was coming. I quickly followed him. He ran the entire way straight back to the car, stopping every few seconds and turning to make sure I was still following him. He didn't let up until we got to the car. As soon as I opened the driver's door, he jumped in and climbed into the back, still looking very tense. As I drove away, I could see in my rear vision that Simba had his head turned and was looking out the rear window, as if he were expecting something to come out of the forest. It wasn't until we got back on the main road that he relaxed. Extremely disturbing. Just typing and thinking about that walk has sent shivers up my spine. Avid outdoor backpackers are here. One night, I and a friend who was new to backpacking went out into the woods for what I thought would be a quick, easy, and fun overnight trip. It starts off fine. Fire, sausage, peace and quiet, etc. We go to sleep in a wooden shelter. This shelter is not on any maps, we just stumbled upon it on a day hike previously and went back to spend the night. We're pretty far out in the bush, about an hour's hike to where we parked and then an hour's drive back home, and this is in southwest Sweden. In the middle of the night, my friend wakes me up and says he is not feeling well and demands to go back home. I'm not thrilled about this, obviously, and I was fast asleep, but fine, that's what friends are for, let's go home. It's around 3 a.m. and we're carefully making our way back on an isolated lumber trail. There are only a few scattered farms in the area, several kilometers from where we were. My friend says he needs to stop and rest. He says he has a fever. He sits down on the trail, and we relax. He's talking to me, but I can hear something in the bushes about 10 meters away, and I tell him to shut up. It's quiet again. No big deal, I think. Probably a bird. He starts talking again, and sure enough, I hear it again. This time it's pretty unmistakable that something is walking towards us in the woods, now about 5 meters away. Now I am a bit spooked, so I actually take out my knife and tell my friend to shut up again. I figure I might as well just get this out of the way, whatever it is, so I just walk into the brush towards the sound. It's dark, of course, but there is a bit of moonlight. I stop after a few meters and look around. All is still and quiet for a solid 30 seconds or so, and I can't see or hear anything. My heart actually starts speeding up. Then, all of a sudden, I could see a shadow right in front of me move. It was about the size of a big dog, but I didn't see any features of whatever this thing was. I am not superstitious at all, I am an atheist, in fact, just for the record. But there is this dark, low shadow of something in the bushes. I watch it for a few seconds, and then suddenly I see this dark patch get lower, as if it laid or hunched down. I raised my knife and slowly backed away from the trail again, and I told my friend we had to go right away. We got back to the car. I am a bit shaken, but my friend is pretty oblivious, but otherwise we're okay. To this day, I try to think of the most reasonable explanation. I doubt that it was a doghouse, too far away, plus it was below freezing out. Too big for a fox. Wolf, I also don't think so, as they are very shy, and why would a wolf follow two loud guys at night? I have run into boars a few times, and they are not very slick. I never even heard of a boar tracking people before. If it were a human, what the duck kind of person goes out on trails in the middle of the night and then follows people? A crazy person, sure, but a crazy ninja? In Sweden? I'd love to hear other ideas on this. Anyhow, that is probably the most afraid I have been. Hell, it's in the top 5 of my whole life, I'd say. My parents bought a cabin in the Washington Mountain Range, VA. My mother and sister would go there and spend weekends. I remember my mother talking about how they would wake up and the side door of the cabin would be open. They changed the locks, but it continued. What was odd was that we never arrived to find the door open. It only opened when someone was staying in the cabin. Summer or winter, it didn't matter. I laughed it off, thinking they left it open or didn't close it properly, etc. Being young and adventurous, I decided to spend the night in the cabin during the winter. The cabin was not heated but did have electricity and a small wood stove. So I drove my Jeep out there after work and got to the cabin after dark. I arrived, and a light snow had started to fall. I was very cold, and I was already regretting going because it was only 13 degrees Fahrenheit. I quickly lit a fire and stoked it to produce as much heat as possible. I closed the door and locked it, pulling it several times to ensure it was closed and not going to open in the middle of the night. Yes, I was laughing at the stories about it being open in the morning. I climbed into bed and put an extra quilt on to keep me warm. I quickly fell asleep. I had a nightmare. In my nightmare, I dreamed that I woke up, and the cabin was ridiculously cold. I walked from the bedroom to relight the fire, and I immediately saw the door open and turned 90 degrees to see a tall, lizard-like demon with glowing red eyes staring at me. I immediately woke up from the dream, and I was like, wow, here I am in the middle of nowhere by myself, and I'm having nightmares. Great. I then noticed that it was very cold. So I climbed out of bed and walked towards the other room to relight the fire. As I enter the room, I turn, and in the darkness, I can see the door sitting wide open. Snow had blown onto the floor. The nightmare was coming true. The nightmare was playing out exactly, and the next part was to see a large demon. I let out a yell and fumbled for the light switch like a madman. My mind was racing. The lights came on, and there was nothing there. I looked at the snow and didn't see any footprints or evidence of tampering. So in my engineering mind, I assumed the heating of the structure caused some structural shift and caused the door to pop open. I still didn't go back to the cabin for quite some time. A few years later, a house was built directly across the street. A few months after the new owners moved in, I walked over and introduced myself. We chatted for a little while, and I asked how he and the family liked the place. He said they loved the area, but it was taking the kids some time to get used to living in the country. He smiled and said, they're a bit spooked by it all. I asked, spooked? Yeah, they think a monster comes into their room at night. It was in the late 1980s. I discovered 2 bodies that had been in a 1950s car for more than 30 years. It was in Alabama. My neighborhood had just been built, and it was on the east side of our town, about 5 miles from the edge of town at the time. That side of the town was formerly cotton fields that had been owned by the same family since the 1820s, and in the late 1970s they sold some of their land holdings to developers. To describe it, the area we lived in was on a flat plateau. Behind our neighborhood was a wooded area that sloped down from the houses or plateau. This lower area had never been developed or used as farmland because it was literally like a 3-mile circle-shaped bowl, which was about 100 feet lower than the surrounding flatlands. A friend and I saw on a map that if we walked 2 miles through the woods, directly behind our house, we could eventually end up intersecting a main road that looped around the rural parts of that corner of the town. One summer day, we decided to hike through the woods, find the road, and walk around the road until we came back home. It would have been about a 5-6 mile hike, all told. We started down the hill, and after a few hours of walking through woods, marshland, and such, we heard cars and knew we were close. We were getting into some wet swamp land, but we walked on the exposed tree roots and managed to make our way through. As we approached the uphill slope 2 miles from where we started, we saw an old car, dented and smashed, upside down, but with the roof dented in the swamp or woods at the base of the long hill. The trees were thick, and there was a full canopy of trees above where we couldn't see the road, but we could hear an occasional car. The windows were all intact and covered in moss and dirt, and you could see water lines from where the water had stayed long enough to leave a water line dry. This was repeated many, many times. At first, we thought someone had just dumped it here long ago. Then I wiped off the driver's side window and looked in. Whatever was in the car was in a heap on the roof of the overturned car. It looked like a big pile of mud in the car. I saw a skeleton leg and foot. And then an arm and skull in the center mound of mud. Then I saw 2 skulls. We scrambled up the hill and waved our arms frantically, and a man stopped. We told him we saw a crashed car with dead people inside. He told us to stay there, and we drove off to call the police. He returned and stayed with us on the side of the road. Looking down from the road, we couldn't even see the car, it was back in the woods and well hidden. About 15 minutes later, we heard sirens, and the police and an ambulance showed up. We took the police and paramedics down the hill and showed them the car. It had rusted out plates that you could still make out the numbers on. They took a lot of pictures and eventually removed the bodies in body bags. Being 14 years old, there was no way we were going to miss seeing this. Several hours passed, and they pulled out what they could from the car. In the trunk, there were tattered boxes with dirty fabric bows on them. They laid out everything on tarps and collected it in bags. It turned out that the car was a man, and his wife had left to go visit family on Christmas Day in 1951. The road would have had very little traffic, and no one would have seen the accident happen. It had been raining very hard that day. The car most likely hydroplaned, and they went tumbling down the hill. 1950s cars had metal dashboards and metal roofs, and people didn't really wear seatbelts. I think they banged around in the car, knocked themselves out, and ended up upside down in the water. They probably died from drowning or from their tumbling injuries. A few weeks later, the police came to my house to tell us what they had found out. That's when they told us who the people were, and that they had been missing since Christmas 1951. At age 10, I was in the Boy Scouts with my best friends. It was a great way to spend time together and learn how to navigate nature. Late one October evening, we all played a game in the woods. Our scout leaders would patrol a large area in the woods, carrying flashlights and 3 stations of candy placed around the area. The objective was to sneak to the candy stations without being detected. My friend and I decided to play the long game and go for the furthest candy station, located deepest in the woods. We sneaked through the dense forest, carefully placing our steps and pacing our advance. Out of the corner of my eye, about 10 or so meters from us, I spot a glow in the dark. We both turned to face the light, thinking it was a flashlight at a distance. However, we see a silhouette of a man sitting with his back against the tree, smoking a cigarette. He clearly sees us, and we completely freeze. We could not make out his features, and he stayed motionless until he went for another draw of his cigarette. We ran back to the meeting point and told our scout leaders, who quickly called off the game, counting that all scouts were safe. Needless to say, we haven't returned to those woods since. Ghosts in the Army. In basic training, I saw 2 instances of paranormal activity. The first instance was when I was on fire guard. During fire guard, you stay up for 1 hour of the night and make sure nothing happens. Additionally, you complete a cleaning task. My bay had 3-man fire guard shifts, with 2 on cleaning duty and 1 at the desk acting as a scribe. I was usually the scribe, as my battle buddies couldn't fill out a 1594 fire guard sheet to save their lives. Anyway, one night I was at my desk scanning the bay when I saw a dark figure moving behind the bunks and into the latrine. We all wear black PT uniforms to sleep, so I thought it was just a battle buddy. Here's the thing, though, when someone needs to use the latrine, they're supposed to provide an ID in the form of their common access card or dog tags and place it at the desk. This way, if something goes wrong, we know where everyone is. Normally, when someone fails to do the right thing and turn in their ID, I simply make a note of it, and it gets dealt with in the morning. But my battle buddies had annoyed me with how often they screwed up and got us doing extra push-ups for day 1 nonsense. So, feeling vindictive, I left my desk and went to confront this prick for failing to do the right thing again. Well, I checked the latrine, opened every door, and checked every shower. There were only 2 people in there, my battles cleaning the sinks. I asked if anyone other than me had been in there, there had not been. A quick accountability sweep of the bay confirmed that no one was out of place. Later that week, at the rifle range, one of our drill sergeants dropped the bomb on us, saying that the bay was, in fact, haunted by an entity called the Shadow Man. My next BCT ghost was on the day of graduation. After all the festivities and our graduation as soldiers of the US Army, we all went back to our bays and waited for our buses to pick us up and take us to our next site for training. Since my bus was the last to show and wouldn't get there until the morning, I had one last night in that bay. That night, I was on the drill pad with a battle buddy who needed to make a phone call. As I was pacing around, I glanced into the woods. That's when I saw it. Standing just behind the tree line. There was an all-white figure, like a naked slender man, standing there. It had no features to speak of other than its humanoid shape. Keeping my eyes on it, I signaled for my battle buddy to check it out. He saw I was spooked and rushed over. I took my eyes off the tree line for 1 second, but in that time, it disappeared. Thoroughly creeped out, my battle buddy and I rushed back into our bay. We weren't dealing with that shit. But my most recent encounter with a ghost was by far my closest. I was in my barracks, trying to get some rest. The lights were out, and I was very tired. I looked around the room, and that's when I saw it. Standing in the corner of the room, not 10 feet from where I was sleeping, was a figure. I quickly turned on my bedside lamp, and it disappeared. Thinking it was my imagination, I turned the lamp off again, and it appeared in the corner again. Freaking out, I turned the lamp on again, and it disappeared. Here's the kicker, though, I had some mirrors that faced the corner. Even with the lamp on, the figure was clearly visible in the mirrors. Bright as day. It was of average height and covered in burns. It was missing its arm at the elbow. On the same side as its missing arm, its jaw had separated from the rest of the head, such that the jawbone was hanging on by a thread on the opposite side. As a final touch, its eye on the same side looked like it had popped and melted out of its socket. It was a grotesque visage. Whatever this may have been in life, they had clearly died a horrible and painful death. It didn't make any noise, and it didn't move from its place. So, still wanting sleep, I kept the lamp on and created a makeshift blindfold. The next morning, it had left my mirrors and completely disappeared. I haven't seen it in a while. Bases belonging to the military are notoriously haunted. A lot of people have died here for various reasons, and not all of them peacefully. Fort Sill, where I did BCT, has even had reports of sinkwalkers and wendigos. Maybe that's what I saw on graduation night, who knows? I was hiking a little outside of Vancouver in a densely wooded area known to have many cougars, mountain lions. I had my dog with me, who was a huge, tall thing, part Irish wolfhound, and fiercely loyal. We had been hiking for about an hour and were far enough back by then that we hadn't seen anyone else in quite some time. I stopped at a log to take a short break. We'd been sitting there for about 5 minutes when my dog went stiff, hackled up, and started growling while staring into the dense brush. I stare into the woods, but I can't see anything at all. It's gone quite though, that kind of eerie silence the forest takes on sometimes. The dog is still growling, looking at a spot about 6 feet off the ground. I decide it's time to get out of there and take up a quick pace back the way we came. The dog lets me get a bit ahead, then stops growling and follows me. He's anxious, though, and keeps stopping to check behind us. We get about 15 minutes down the path when the dog stops again, facing the woods along the path, and barks a sharp 3 or 4 times, then resumes growling intensely. I keep moving, and he sort of stiff-legged walks a few steps, stops and growls, catches up to me, walks a few more steps, growling, etc. He occasionally barks. I cannot, for the life of me, see anything in the woods. No movement, no animals, nothing. The whole hike back goes like that. I never see a thing. Once we reached a bridge and more people, my dog finally relaxed and stopped growling and barking, but he's still keen to get out of there. I've always assumed it was a cougar stalking us. We never went back there. A few years ago, me and my girlfriend took a month-long trip driving up the west coast of the US, stopping at national parks and camping along the way. We were on our way to Death Valley a little later in the day, around 5 o'clock. We knew the sun would set around 8 o'clock and could get some pretty sweet magic hour shots of the sand dunes if we made it in time. We're photographers. I don't know how much information on Death Valley is common knowledge, but it's known to have the lowest elevation in North America and has no cell phone reception. When you're heading in, it's strongly recommended that you let someone know what part of Death Valley you're going to and what time you plan on heading out. If they don't hear from you by that time, they can call dispatch to send someone looking for you. If you're the adventurous type, finding yourself can be like looking for a needle in a haystack. We made the 2-hour drive through 120 degrees Fahrenheit, with windows rolled down and the AC off, in case the car overheats, out to the sand dunes just in time to catch the sun going down. I took some great photos. There's something strange about sunsets in Death Valley. There are faint streaks of purple and red haze that glow from the sun setting behind the mountains. It's kind of eerie. We get back to the car in the dark and start our long journey back. Just knowing that one of our tires could potentially lead to us being stranded put me on edge a little bit, so I was focused as hell. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed headlights behind us approaching at a pretty fast speed. As they got closer, they started flashing their high beams at us. I figured they wanted to drive around us, so I slightly pulled to the side, but they stuck right behind me, continuing to flash their lights. Now I'm thinking that it's somebody who needs help, and they are asking me to pull over. I slow to a stop, but sure as hell don't get out of the car. They stop behind me. I watch my rearview mirror as closely as possible to get any hint of what's going on. I can now see that it's a minivan, and there's some shuffling going on, but it's too dark to see who's inside. I sat there for a good minute, trying to decide what to do. The side door of the van swings open, and a light in the van turns on to reveal 5 to 6 teenagers grabbing things from different parts of the van. They were each stepping out of the van into the dark one by one, walking towards the car. My foot hit that ducking gas pedal, and the van's headlights were 2 specks in a few seconds. I had no idea what was going on, but we sure as hell weren't going to be part of it. It definitely put us in a weird mood for the night. Mid-90s, Midwest town. My parents' house sits on a fairly large lake. You could see the other side, but you wouldn't want to try to swim across it. At this time, we didn't have high-speed internet and infinite porn to watch, we didn't even have cable out in the boonies, so we had to find more creative ways to entertain ourselves. So we borrowed my mother's minivan and set out in an attempt to locate the creepy, run-down dock on the other side of the lake from our house. We left at midnight. 2 hours later, and we're not having any luck. Our direction sense isn't the best, and the lake is big enough that there is no clear route to this place. Just as we were about to give up, we saw it. A little, almost gravel road, I believe the term is chipped and sealed, that leads back towards the lake from the main road. About a mile down the road, there is a sign that reads, Egypt Hollow, no visitors. You're right. The first house we passed should have been enough for us to turn around. The house is ancient. There are 3 gravestones in the front yard and a single lit candle in the middle upstairs window. So that's a little strange. Whatever. We keep going. 2 houses go by uneventfully, but the third one has an odd sight to see at 2:30 a.m. An ancient couple on rocking chairs happily rocking back and forth. They have an old school lantern sitting on one of those barrels that Donkey Kong likes to throw. The weird thing was, they didn't even look up as we drove past, they just stared straight ahead, rocking back and forth. Our resolve is becoming shaky, but we continue. Another mile down the road, and success. We've found the spooky dock across the lake from our house, and it did not disappoint in the spooky department. It's run down severely, and sitting by what remains of the picnic area is the corpse of a deer, or what was left of it. Only half of the deer is there, the other half was eaten, ripped in half, or God knows what. As we are sitting there speculating, we hear this horrendous noise, like starting an engine with no oil in it. It was so loud, I'll never forget it. We floor it, and our wheels spin on the gravel. That 2 seconds of our wheels spinning was probably the scariest single moment of my life. I thought we were stuck. It's amazing how many instantaneous, terrible thoughts you can have in such a short amount of time. Wheels finally catch, and off we go. A few minutes of what the F. Later, we are headed back towards the main road to get the hell out of there. We're about halfway back to the main road, and there is this eerie orange light coming from the woods to our right. I want to leave, but peer pressure at 15 is bad. We turn down this super narrow road that is more like a hiking trail and head toward the light. We round the next corner, and there is an open field with a massive bonfire, like Wicker Man style. And standing around this fire are about 20 to 30 people with their arms in the air, like some sort of weird ritual. One of them points at us, and in unison, they all turn to look. If you ever need to know the performance limits of a 1988 Plymouth Voyager on a dirt road in reverse, I'm your man. We noped harder than anyone else had ever done before. And so ended our adventure to Egypt Hollow. That was 20 years ago now, and although we still talk about it from time to time, we never went back. Back in the day, 1981 or 1982, when I was an international truck driver, I moved out to the middle of Duckin' Nowhere, Oklahoma, for business reasons. This house was the only one around for about 2 or 3 miles in any direction and about 15 minutes from the closest town. I'm talking so secluded that you could hear a person tiptoeing from 10 feet away if you listened for it. Anyway, on the very first day there, me and my newlywed wife unpacked our stuff and got situated in the 2-story house. After a long day, we decided to take a break, have a little nap, and finish up the little bit of work we had later. This was right before sunset when we got in bed, and I instantly fell asleep. I woke up after what felt like hours to see a young blonde girl, probably 16 to 19 years old, wearing only white, standing right over me, looking down with a peaceful smile. I could feel my wife laying against me, breathing heavily, if anyone knew of such a girl around there. I never found an explanation for it all, and I never saw her again. The only thing I learned was that the previous owner hanged himself in the barn, but I feel like that has nothing to do with my experience. This is a brief account of an experience I had almost a year ago in the warehouse where I work alone. No one I've told has believed me, but perhaps you all will. I work in a warehouse that my father purchased. He bought it for 25% of its cost from a farmer, who seemed very excited to get rid of it. It is in the middle of Mennonite country, with no neighbors for a half-mile around. Look out the window. You see cornfields and scraggly trees. Cell service? Forget about it. I work here alone, painting and preparing the front office portion for eventual functionality. To get to the front office, you must go through a hallway from the main warehouse, into a secondary office, and then through another door into the front. I frequently hear bumps and thuds and occasionally go into the warehouse and feel air movement, but I've always attributed it to drafts and animal life on the roof. The only thing that has ever made me uneasy about the building is the fact that all of the door locks are reversed. Whoever installed those locks didn't intend to keep people out, they intended to keep something in. It never really got too freaky, until one day I was in the front office when I began to hear the thudding. I ignored it and continued to apply masking tape to the door I was working on. But this time, it was accompanied by a screeching sound. Not loud, but audible. I was freaked out, but I convinced myself that it was just a pissed-off raccoon or squirrel that had found its way inside. I continued working until I heard the slam. The door to the secondary office had been open. It sounded like it had been violently slammed shut. I peeked around the corner and saw that I was right, the secondary door was now closed. I tried to rationalize in my head that a strong draft had sucked it closed, although I knew there was no such draft. The thudding began again. Closed this time. I've never been able to put a proximity on it, but now it sounds like it's right on the other side of the door. I froze, unsure of what was happening. My eyes locked on the door handle, which began to turn. The door disengaged its latch and slowly swung open. Wider. Wider. Nothing there. Nothing visible, no air movement, just quiet. So quiet. A quiet that seemed to overwhelm me with its presence, a quiet so thick I couldn't breathe. The quiet was shattered when the screech came again. This time, it was clearly human. Pained, angered, and emanating from the main warehouse. The door slammed. That entirely broke my frozen, fearful state. I ran. I got into my car and drove until I was in cell range to call my father. He didn't believe anything about the doors closing, but agreed that the building had something weird about it. He told me he'd be right out. Fast forward half an hour. My dad and I met up and drove back to the warehouse. I showed him the door that slammed, showing him that it was separated from both the front office and the main warehouse, so no draft could have closed it. I told him about the thuds, the screeching, and the sudden quiet that overcame the building. He decided that we should check the main warehouse. Emboldened by his presence, I led the way. Something you should know about this warehouse: it was formerly a furniture manufacturing place owned by a Mennonite farmer. They made handmade chairs, tables, etc. Because of all the cutting that went on, the floor is thickly coated with dust. We walked into the warehouse and saw nothing out of the ordinary. The dust was untouched, the doors were closed, and the windows were locked. The only thing out of the ordinary was one of the hanging fluorescent light fixtures. It was hanging askew and swaying slightly. Insisting, we took a look at the mount to ensure it didn't just break loose. My dad grabbed a stepladder. He supported it while I climbed up and grabbed the swinging light. I looked at the light and saw a handprint. A single, fresh, inhumanly large handprint. No footprints in the dust around the light, no signs of a presence. I climbed down and switched places with my father. He saw it and said, "What the hell? There's been no one in here for years." He climbed down and told me he'd been suspicious of someone breaking in and stealing parts from the warehouse light system. He couldn't believe me that this wasn't human and that something wasn't right here. The last thing he said was, "Nothing is here. Next time, just go back to work." And then, as if to show its presence, the thud returned. This time it wasn't just a thud, but more of an earthquake. The entire building felt like it moved. The heartbeat-like thud was then overlaid by the screech. The awful, awful screech. It felt like it was coming from the walls themselves. We ran. We ran, and I haven't returned. My father hired someone to finish my job and has since moved into the office. He's heard the thudding, but thus far, nothing has happened further. What actually happened? I don't know. Nor do I ever care to know. What I do know is that there is something paranormal in that building, and the man who sold it to us knew it. I'll never forget the sound of that lock turning by itself, or the feeling of that thunderous silence. So I was on guard duty. Isolated location, any real backup is half an hour away. It was dark, windy, and raining a lot. It was in fact not calm before the storm, it was a bit stormy before the storm. This was around 3 a.m. So there I was, walking my rounds armed with a huge ass flashlight straight out of an 80s or 90s movie and an ice phone. The flashlight was able to illuminate up to a meter, 3 or 4 feet in freedom units, I think. Half of the area I was guarding didn't have any lights, and it was pure darkness outside the fence. I was basically standing there, alone in the open, in a poorly lit fish bowl. I had done my due diligence before the round and watched the feed from surveillance cameras, but the rain meant that visibility was next to nothing anyway. It wasn't a high-risk place, but due to tens of millions of dollars worth of equipment, maybe 100 million plus weapons, there was always a risk of someone trying to get in. It didn't help that I knew how easy it was at the time to break in. After all, fences are primarily there to keep law-abiding citizens away. I was at the end of my round, the rain had let up a bit. I got through the dark part without incident, and it was a poorly lit area. I was heading back to the warmth of my guard cabin. Then I got this feeling that I should look towards the middle of this compound, which was quite an open area. I don't remember hearing a sound, it was just a feeling. I turned my head left, nothing was there. But in the corner of my eye, I saw a man-sized figure taking off. It's funny how many thoughts one can go through when adrenaline kicks in. I'd like to think I put my chest out, my back straight, and my chin up. But I probably gave a hunchback a run for their money while trying to shuffle the flashlight in the direction of whatever was running. It wasn't a man, it wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a Wendigo, Indigo, or Ninjago, it was a deer. This goddamn Bambi crept up next to me without a sound. It was the second time a deer got my heart pounding while on guard duty. A couple of years ago, my best friend and I went on a road trip to the States for a music festival. I met up with some friends, saw lots of things, and whatnot. One of our friends comes home with us, he needed to get back home for school, and his buddies didn't want to head home yet. We decided to drive straight home in shifts, it took 24 hours for the full drive. Anyway, my story starts where I am driving, night shift, at about 2 a.m. It is a beautifully clear night with a full moon, no clouds, and a middle of summer party type night. While observing all of these conditions, I also noticed we had followed the GPS onto a back road and driven into a huge valley. Open fields, not another car or house in sight, and it is important to note that we have not seen anyone or anything relating to human presence for a few hours. Upon entering this valley, we lose our satellite signal. We have no satellite radio, no GPS, and no cell signal. Cool beans don't really matter, as I know we will follow this road for a couple more hours. About 20 minutes after entering this valley and losing all our connections, we come upon a bridge. As we get closer, I see a car pulled out on the side of the road. It is not uncommon for people to sleep in pullouts when they have the opportunity. What is uncommon is that this car has all of its windows blacked out. With all of the light from the moon, we should be able to see at least partially inside, but it was completely black. Getting closer, we also realize that it has no license plate that we can see. No big deal, we assume that it is abandoned out here in the boonies, that is, until we pass this vehicle and almost immediately its lights turn on, and it pulls out behind us on the road. Now this is where it gets creepy, this vehicle starts tailgating us in the middle of nowhere, and we can't see who is inside or anything. Again, we brush it off. Maybe he is lost and needs to follow someone out of the area. It doesn't explain the windows being blacked out or the lack of a license plate, however. Anyway, with this car following us, I started to get an uneasy feeling. Subtle at first, but growing stronger. Soon I get an all-out get the duck away from this vehicle ASAP feeling. I find it important to note that I do not frighten easily, I do not panic, and I only have ever gotten this feeling in times when I know for a fact that my life is in danger. I push these feelings aside as it seems like the silliest response to a possibly explainable situation, that is, until I see something in the middle of the road. Almost on cue, this car backs off as I and my companions, one of whom was asleep beforehand, try to make out what is in the middle of the road. Coming closer, we see what looks to be a body laying in the middle of the lanes. This is not a big road, and like I said, it was also a back road, still paved but very small. At this moment and at the sight of what appears to be a body on the road ahead, we start freaking out. In no way am I stopping for anyone in this desolate and isolated area. There are no other vehicles around other than the one following us, and I can see no housing or lights for as far as the eye can see. No cell service, no satellite, nothing. I quickly tell the others that I am not stopping and that I am going around or through. By this time we are almost on it. There is no room to go around as there are no shoulders on the road and deep ditches on the sides, and we are close enough to see now that it is a scarecrow, and I drive over top and onwards. This car, small enough to go around it, continues to follow. I speed up, it speeds up, I slow down, it slows down. Until I punch it. After about 2 minutes of this, the car slows down, does a U-turn, and drives back. Now my passenger turns to me and says, "I swear I saw spikes in that thing." Lucky for us, we were driving a huge truck, the wheel span was bigger than the scarecrow on the road, and we never even touched it. It was another half hour before we reached cell service, and the satellite picked back up. It wasn't until we reached home at 5 a.m. that we remembered that during this time there had been a couple of missing people reported in our province, ones who were on vacation and driving home from the States who never made it home or were ever found. I and my passengers fully believed that we escaped some crazy Wolf Creek type of death for ourselves. Anyway, that's my creepy story, 100% true. When I was younger, I had a friend who would come over in the morning before school. Her mom was a bus driver and had to leave around 5:30 a.m. so our routine was that my mom would wake us up about 2 hours later. We eat breakfast and get ready. Then her mom would pick us up while driving the bus. So this girl became one of my closer friends. We did cheerleading, gymnastics, and Girl Scouts. The whole 9 yards. So as our friendship progressed, I eventually went to sleep over at her house. I remember thinking I was so cool when we got to hang out with her 2 older brothers. Picture the Hollister and Frosted Tips era. Often enough, though, her brothers played pranks on us. Breaker box to shut off and flash the lights. One time they dipped their hands in mud and put muddy handprints on the window and made a noise that sounded like it was indeed right out of that window, so when we looked, we were terrified. Then boom, they bust out laughing, and you realize you were punked. One evening, we were sitting in her bedroom. The house was split level, with a den and bathroom down 4 stairs, then the kitchen living room on the main floor, and 5 stairs up to the bedrooms. So as we lay in her room, we heard shuffling noises that sounded like they were on the other side of the wall. We put our ears up, focusing intensely, and all of a sudden, the vacuum powers on and begins moving in the hall. We jump back and scream. Only to laugh and call the brothers out of hiding. They got us. Then, in an instant, we realized they're not home. We were so afraid that she yelled at her mom, who came and asked why we would turn on the vacuum and tell her this late. We explain the story, and she looks at my friend and says, "Now what do we do when this kind of thing happens?" My friend responds, "We shut our minds, close our eyes, and think of happy thoughts. Then we go to sleep like nothing happened." Now back to my routine before school. It's almost summer. One morning, she came into my room and was crying. She explains to me that she wants to tell me something. She claims she's seen an old woman sitting at your kitchen table. She's there every morning, but the days that she comes by me and stands there, I come into your room. Now hold the phone, because I am stunned. Terrified and also trying to process this. She continues and says, "My whole life, I've been able to sense and hear things. But my mom doesn't like when I tell someone. The night you were at my house, I knew something was behind the vacuum turning on, I could sense it." She's now 13 years old. My best friend is basically saying she sees ghosts, and I'm sitting there wondering if she is lying or telling the truth. So after school, I try my best at a young age, which is to Google my address and see if anyone has in fact died there. Or even an older woman owning it. However, I was unsuccessful. So I started poking and prodding questions from my mom. Like, who owned the house before us, or did you ever meet them? Then my teenager's brain gets an idea. My mom is about to question why I'm curious about all this. I tell her that the woman, who we didn't know, walked over and asked if we had a forward address for the woman who lived here. My mom stops dead in her tracks. She turns around and tells me I'll handle it. After that, my friend and I finished school for the year and continued to hang out. Now this part is a little blurry to remember, but her family had come over for a bonfire. They were there, the subject of ghosts, paranormal, etc. when my friend's mom says that she has always attracted what her mom believes are spirits, just like a medium. She's still a young teen. My mom is surprised to hear that, but she does start to ask questions. As she got through a couple, my friend spoke up and said, "I've seen her. The old woman died in the kitchen." My mom turned white. After hearing that, I think my mom believed it 100%. She then goes inside, where she has an obituary of the women who did, in fact, die of heart disease in the kitchen at our house. It turns out my grandma has worked with her. Up until this point, I didn't know anything about it. So my friend went on to move 3 times, and as I grew up, I could remember every house they stayed at having this feeling of something watching you. When I was around 13 or 14 or so, I started seeing and hearing weird shit around my house. I took the bus home from school, and my mom always picked up my little brother from middle school, so I was normally the first one home by 30 to 45 minutes. At that time, I would normally sit down and start working on my homework. Anyway, one day I started hearing shit like footsteps around the house when I knew I was home alone. With the way our house was set up, if someone was walking down the stairs, I could have seen them from the living room, where I usually chill after school, but I never saw anyone there. A few months after hearing invisible people walking around my house, I started seeing things. Every so often, usually around every other week or so, I would see a man in my house at around 6:30 a.m. when I was getting ready for school. We lived in a split-level home with the bedrooms on the second floor, and whenever I was walking down the upstairs hall to the bathroom, I would always see him downstairs, turning the corner from the living room into the kitchen. The very first time it happened, I sneaked downstairs with no small amount of trepidation, only to find an empty kitchen. Nobody was downstairs. From that point on, I chose to ignore the man I saw. He always appeared the same, around the same time. Average height male in his 30s, light brownish blonde hair, a green plaid shirt, and khaki pants. It never varied. Although this was a few years before WebMD, I still had the internet and managed to diagnose myself with schizophrenia. I never told anyone about my visual and auditory hallucinations, for fear of being locked up in an institution. Of course, later diagnoses proved that I am not schizophrenic, but whatever. The point is that I never mentioned what I was seeing or hearing to anyone. About 2 years after I started seeing SHT, my family moved 2 states away and started a new life. As soon as we moved into the new house, the visions stopped. I never saw or heard anything that didn't seem real again. 2 years after moving, I was touring and interviewing at various colleges. My mom was usually the one to take me out of state for an interview, and with that being the case, we often ended up in the car together for 5+ hours straight. On one trip together, the topic of the paranormal came up. During our conversation, I learned that she absolutely believed in ghosts and spirits. I decided this was a good time to mention my past experience and simply said, "Hey Mom, I know this sounds weird, but I saw some really strange shit in our old house." She immediately turned towards me, looking shocked, and said, "Did you see the man in the green plaid shirt?" Keep in mind that I purposefully never mentioned what I saw to anyone. My mom could describe exactly what I had seen for 2 years without me ever mentioning it to her. It was ducking creepy. I once worked at a youth summer camp in Ohio as a counselor for kids. I arrived early with my best friend to help set up the facilities before the rest of the staff. My friend was in an intense relationship and would often spend hours on the phone with his girlfriend and fall asleep on the couch in the big house of the camp. Now the camp is huge, over about 20 acres, and we had been assigned to sleep in what was called the cage, which was a really old, weird wooden cabin. There was literally no one else at the camp at that point, just the 2 of us. So I would fall asleep in the cage while my friend was on the phone. Now I'm not the kind of guy that gets easily freaked out, only because I usually don't realize the severity of the situation until much later. I woke up out of a dead sleep to the sound of children laughing. In the dark. The F. So naturally, what do? I casually get up and go get my friend, a long walk through an unlit field. He had fallen asleep in the main building again. He is half awake and asks me who is laughing. The next day, the rest of the staff arrives, and what do? They start telling ghost stories about the camp and the old director, from 100 years ago or something, and how at night you can still hear his campers, that he murdered, of course, laughing at you. We started to tell the staff about the previous night and what happened, and they freaked out so bad they had to stop. Freaky time. The Grave Stomper. This event occurred when I was 7 years old, during the summer of 1968. At the time, we lived in an old farmhouse about a quarter-mile from an old church cemetery in southeast Wisconsin. I visited this cemetery on most days with my dog, Taffy. I would puzzle out the inscriptions on tombstones more than 100 years old, climb trees, and generally have a good time for a 7-year-old. I should also mention that in the southeast corner of the cemetery, there was a collection of 4 rectangular tombstones laid flat on the ground in an open area. While I knew every corner and stone of the place, strangely, something always made sure I wouldn't go over there. I never had any odd feelings or felt any threat, but whenever I approached that area, something would always distract me from going there. It was early August, and for some reason I got the crazy idea to go to that cemetery at night to see if I could spot a ghost. I was so used to the cemetery that I wasn't afraid, I just thought it was a neat thing to do. So on a moonlit night, after being put to bed, I managed to sneak out of the house and bring Taffy with me. I never had to keep Taffy on a leash, she would always dutifully stay within about 100 feet of me, no matter where I went. When I got to the cemetery, I tempted fate by jumping on tombstones in the hopes of insulting some ghost. I stopped and waited. Nothing happened. Only the sounds of crickets and Taffy nearby and tall grass looking for mice broke the silence. I then stomped on the graves themselves, demanding loudly to be haunted. I waited. Nothing continued to happen. And Taffy still couldn't find a mouse, not even a ghost one. I eventually gave up, was disappointed, and went back home. 2 nights later, I returned. As before, I stomped on some graves and demanded to be haunted. Taffy was poking around within sight, a few yards away. What happened next is a bit difficult to describe. I was facing the corner of the cemetery I never went into. In one instant, the crickets stopped, and the air above that corner seemed like it froze and then cracked. Taffy was instantly alert, then immediately bolted away. A fraction of a second later, I followed, running faster than I had ever run in my life. We were both headed for the house, and I somehow knew that something was in the air above, chasing me. I actually beat the dog back to the house. Inside I slammed the door, and I sensed that this thing was flying around and around the whole outside of the house. Now I hear this terrible panicky growl and scratching at the door. Taffy was still outside. I opened the door to let her in, and she wrapped herself around my legs, shivering. I couldn't walk without tripping over her. At this point, my mother comes down and wants to know what on earth am I doing. And stops mid-sentence when she notices the dog shaking between my legs. She knew something was up, the house we lived in had its own troubles, and told me to get back to bed. I actually felt calm, and I no longer felt any presence outside at all. I slept soundly. Needless to say, I never asked to be haunted again. 1. This takes place at my friend's house. His house has 2 barns where they have horses and a horse sand pit. It's a long lot, with some forest on one side and a large field of crops on the other. This story took place a number of years ago, when we were in grade 11. My buddy was having a bonfire and a relatively chill party with some bevs. These kinds of gatherings usually just end up with us all sitting around the fire, sipping beer, rather than trying to get plastered. The fire would always have a large billow of smoke, depending on the wind, so we would all sit on different sides of it depending on where the smoke went. The sky was completely clear that night with no cloud in sight, with the moon lighting up everything in the distance. The cornfield to the side had just been cleared a couple weeks ago. I was sitting with my back to the field talking to a friend while my buddy, who lived there, and another friend were on the other side of the fire facing the field. In mid-conversation with my friend, I see the other 2 on the other side of the fire seizing up, as if they had just seen a ghost. They both look at each other and say, "Did you just see that?" As if it were scripted. One describes what he saw, and the other confirms. Behind my friend and me in the distance on the other side of the field, there was a tall, shadowy figure. Given the distance and the height, they described it as being around 7 feet. It sprinted from one side of the field to the other, around 200 meters, in 6 seconds. It went from our side of the field to a line of trees that connected the properties. From what they had said, it very noticeably had only 2 legs. We were all pretty creeped out by it and got up to see if we could see it along the trees, but we saw nothing. We have no idea what it was and decided to call it a night, locking the door before we hit the hay. 2. I was at the same friend's house with most of the same people plus a few others we had met after our second year of university. It had been a few years since the strange shadowy figure incident, so we tried to just not think about it or just use it as a joke. We used to joke, saying that Usain Bolt was in the field given how fast it could run. This night, I was facing the field and horse pit. There are a number of trees that stood between the horse pit and the bonfire that made that area very dark even with the moonlight. We were all sitting around talking, and I had just come back after getting another drink. I sat down, listened to conversations, and watched the fire. Some of my friends circled around the bonfire with their backs to the trees and darkness. I began looking out into the darkness and trees. The trees were just outlines in the darkness, with the moonlight backing them. I just scanned back and forth and noticed that one of the outlines of the trees seemed to jut out more since the last time I had looked. I stared intently, trying to focus despite the fire beside me, and could see what looked like an outline of a person crouching beside the tree. I immediately stood up, faced it, and said aloud, "Hello, who is that?" All of my friends immediately stopped talking, and the house owner's girlfriend turned her back and said, "Oh my God. Hello?" As she had seen it too. Eventually, we had about 5 of us up and slowly walking towards the figure, talking slowly to see if it would respond. As we got closer, it shifted behind the tree, and by the time we got to the tree, it was gone. We were constantly trying to come up with theories of what it was and had some ideas of shadows from the fire or a house light, but given the distance between each, they never really added up. I don't know whether this story will be scary to anyone listening to it or not. I am a 17-year-old male currently living in Hawaii, lucky me, but as a child, I was raised in a Christian home in a rural part of Nevada. For as long as I can remember, I have had a fascination for the unexplained and paranormal. Unlike my Christian family, I do not believe in anything that I cannot see myself. Thus, up until recently, I only thought of the supernatural as a very ancient superstition, nothing to be afraid of or concerned about. But like anyone else, I like a good ghost story. Some of the horrific stories that I continued my routine. About 4 years ago, when I still lived in my Nevada home, my 10-year-old sister, who we'll call Sarah for the sake of this story, was scared and asked if she could sleep in my bed with me. This was nothing out of the ordinary. Sarah was still afraid of the dark, and she believed that if she slept with me, nothing would happen, or if something did happen, she'd feel less crazy because I'd be there to witness it. Like the older brother I am, I allowed her to sleep with me. Sometime later, we got into an argument about something that I don't remember. I ended up feeling guilty and apologized for the fight, but Sarah decided to sleep in her room to spite me. I saw her leave, and the way my bed was positioned, I couldn't see her after she had stepped out of my room. 10 seconds after Sarah had left, she sprinted back into my room, looking as pale as a ghost, leapt onto my bed, hid herself under my sheets, and latched onto me with a grip I had never felt before. She began crying, but it wasn't her normal cry. It sounded like there was a force behind her cry, as if she wanted to cry as loud and as long as she could but couldn't out of fear of being heard by someone or something, and her breathing was rapid, irregular, and shallow, as if she were suffocating or drowning and reaching for air. I asked her what was wrong, but she never answered. I thought someone was in the house, so I wanted to get up and check. I moved only an inch before Sarah held me even tighter and cried, "Don't go. Please, don't do." I laid back down and tried to explain, but she talked over me and repeated this about 10 more times before I assured her that I'd stay here until she calmed down. After about 15 minutes, Sarah was calm enough to talk, but now she was shaking. I asked if she felt alright to explain what had happened. Through tears, she explained the horror. When she stepped out of my room, she saw someone standing in the room directly in front of her. The room was my older brother's, who had moved out 7 years prior. Sarah and I had always seen things inside that room through the corner of our eyes, whether it be day or night, but when we looked, nothing would be there. The figure looked like my father, and it stood just enough inside the doorway for her to see its figure. It even appeared to have his exact clothes on. Its body was facing her, and its head was facing 90 degrees to her left, away from her. Once she had seen it, she realized that my father was at work, driving a semi-truck to Boise, Idaho, for one of his regular runs. No other males, besides me, lived there. When she had realized these things, the figure slowly turned its head toward my sister, and while doing so, changed from my father's appearance into what she thinks is its own appearance. In Sarah's words, its hair was frizzy and had black and red streaks. Its eyes were glowing red. It had no nose. Its skin palish blue, you could see the veins, which were tar black. He was extremely tall and slender, with long, bony arms reaching past his knees. His fingers had thick, long, and sharp nails that were stained with a black substance. It wasn't dipping off of his nails, it was, like, crusted on. It stood there extremely straight and stiff and just stared at me. It didn't say anything or make a sound, but it filled me with this almost paralyzing fear. Seeing this, she wanted to run to my parents' room down the hall, but she feared that she might not make it before this thing caught her. So she looked quickly behind her to see if my door was still open so she could dash into my room. When she looked back, the figure was 2 feet closer to her, still retaining the same posture and unwavering stare. As soon as she saw this, she turned and bolted into my room. To her, these few steps into my room seemed like a mile. She felt it get closer and closer with each step she took. But right as she set foot in my room, she felt it stop and or leave, but she never looked back to check. Then she jumped onto my bed and hid herself, latching onto me. Once she had finished, I wanted to believe that this was true and see for myself, but somehow I knew that it wouldn't be there now. I thought about telling our parents about this, but who would believe it? I knew they wouldn't believe. No parent ever does or wants to when this sort of thing happens. You just had a nightmare, they'd say, or it was just your imagination. Thinking about their response got me doubting Sarah's story, but the utter terror and exhausted look that my sister had made me dismiss my doubts. Eventually, we decided to tell our parents. I went first, of course, with her tightly hanging on behind me. When I left my room, I didn't see the figure, which I knew was going to happen and made me feel relieved and bummed at the same time. Upon reaching our parents' room and telling them about it, they said the exact things I predicted. My sister, once hearing their response, snapped and began yelling through sobs at them. What was I thinking? I should have never told you. You never would have believed, unless you saw what I saw. I thought telling you would comfort me, but instead you're sweeping it under the rug and telling me that I'm crazy. Sarah is a sweet and respectful girl. She never raised her voice at our parents, even if she wanted to, so this caught their attention and fully woke them up. They realized, through this outburst and my account of the event, that this was indeed true. My mom called a pastor. It was then 12:51 a.m., and he was to come bless the house. The pastor came and prayed, burned incense, and did other rituals to cleanse our house. I didn't believe any of this worked, but it made my sister feel a little more at ease, so that made me feel better. My parents and Sarah never told anyone of this, still believing it could be some imagination, and I only told a few close friends when they would sleep over. Fortunately, we moved 2 years later to Hawaii, leaving that thing behind. Although other things, such as bowls falling out of the cabinets by themselves or random but ghastly screams, have happened, nothing ever occurred, before or after, that was as serious as this. After this event, I wanted to know what my sister saw, so I searched online for what it could be. I thought that it could be a Wendigo, rake, or skinwalker, but all of those things would have killed my sister, and probably all of us would have killed any of these things. If you think you know what this could be, please write it in the comments, and thank you for listening. I was driving from Atlanta, Georgia, to Lexington, South Carolina, with my girlfriend to visit my parents. I like to drive at night since there are fewer people on the road and I can take my time. At around 3 a.m. or so, we are making good time. I had stopped at a gas station and picked up some coffee for us, and we were due in about an hour. GF was sleeping soundly, and I'm listening to a quiet radio humming away. I start to get a little drowsy and take a sip. The road was just like my coffee, there were no cars in sight except for a few spotted on the side of the road here and there. In the distance, I can make out what looks like a hitchhiker, or what I think is one, but I can't really tell due to the low light. As I get closer, I start to notice other things, like how the person is kind of thin and tall and, for the most part, apparently brown. I'm right up on this thing now, and at about 20 feet, it turns around and locks eyes with me as I pass by. This was not a person. And it is the most terrifying thing I have ever seen in my life. It was a deer. Or I tell myself it was. I have seen deer stand on their hind legs to fight, but they still have deer posture when they do. Not only that, but I was watching this thing walk for about 30 seconds, from first seeing it in the distance to passing it. The posture it had was human. Standard biped stance. Arms back, chin down. But the worst part was the eyes, or lack thereof. In their place were two large black pits, almost black hole-ish. I'll never forget the stare it gave me. The instant I passed it, I had the only panic attack I've ever had in my life. I had to wake up my girlfriend to keep calm enough to get to an exit with a large gas station a few miles away. Like hell, I was going off a ramp close to that thing. After we pulled into the station, I had a complete meltdown. I started crying harder than I ever thought I could. I couldn't talk, breathe, or do anything but want to curl into a ball and cry. After around 30 minutes or so, she finally gets me to calm down enough to tell her what happened. While I don't think she believed what I thought I saw, she knew that I was convinced and legitimately scared to death. Every once in a blue moon, I will dream about it and wake up crying or in a cold sweat, and she will tease me about it or roll over and ignore me instead of comforting me about the one thing that I've ever been terrified of. But I know what I saw, and I know it will haunt me for the rest of my life. This event occurred 2 decades ago, and I find it sufficiently creepy to share it with all of you. When I was 8 years old, I lived with my dad, stepmom, and 2 stepsisters, ages 7 and 6, in a huge house. My dad and stepmom went away for the weekend and left us with a babysitter. She slept in our parents' bedroom, and us kids had a blanket fort or campout in the living room. In the middle of the night, I heard a weird sound, something scraping around on the wood floors in the hall. Our house had no carpet except in the bedrooms, all of the halls and common areas had wood floors. We had 2 dogs at the time, a golden retriever and a chocolate Labrador, so when they ran around, they made a hell of a lot of noise. But this was not one of their familiar sounds. It was both too slow and purposeful. Something else was trudging around inside my house. I imagined some horrific creature with rotting skin and flimsy little legs lurching up and down the halls of our home, poking its head in and out of rooms, searching for a child to snatch and whisk away into the night. My stepsisters slept through the noise. I listened for a long time, then finally got the courage to go investigate. I climbed out of the blanket fortress and grabbed the flashlight off the bar counter. I walked around the ground floor of the house, looking for the source of the scraping sound. The ground floor of our house was comprised of 4 long hallways that made a square. The kitchen and living room were at one end, and at the other, there was that stupid room with all the nice furniture that nobody was ever allowed to actually sit in. It's a rich people thing from my parents' generation. As I reached the off-limits living room, I saw something move past the piano on the far side of the room. It moved into the adjacent hallway. The scraping sounds resumed. I hurried over, flashlight in hand, trying not to trip over anything. As I rounded the corner into the hall, I saw our golden retriever, Bear, walking through the darkness on his hind legs. You know how sometimes when a dog jumps up on you, you grab him by the front paws and kind of help him stand? It looked like someone was doing it with our dog, but there was nobody there. I watched Bear stagger for 4 to 5 steps, his back facing me. When he noticed my light, he fell to all fours and wagged his tail, then resumed walking like a dog normally walks. He trotted away up the stairs to the 2nd floor, like nothing strange was going on. The weirdest thing was, when I was laying in the blanket fortress earlier, I listened to that scraping sound for a good 5 to 10 minutes before deciding to investigate. The dog was walking around in the dark for that long, on his hind legs, in slow circles around the house. To this day, I have never figured out why. He never did it before, and he never did it again after that night. But he apparently freaked out the babysitter too. The next morning she told me that he pushed the door open to my parents' bedroom, went over to the bed, and started making vocalizations that sounded like he was trying to mimic human speech. He did this for several minutes before she locked him out of the room, and he looked pretty rattled the next day when we talked. It's probably not a coincidence that, as an adult, I'm a cat person. My home city has a large park in its center, just over 0.7 miles long. One end opens out near the castle, and the other is a small wood with a river to the west and an accessible road to the east near a music college that shuts off the park boundary. I was walking home late from a friend's house. I'd been on an exercise kick, and the hour-long walk would have gotten me up to 20,000 steps in one day. By the time I reached the park, however, I was feeling pretty tired, so I decided to go through as a shortcut. I do stupid stuff like this all the time. I'm a large man with all the tremendous privilege this brings, even though I have been attacked at night a couple of times over the years that have tended to happen near bars and clubs as opposed to the deserted park. I'm not sure why I did it, but when I entered the park instead of walking left past the ornamental gardens, over a footbridge, and out of the park, my tired brain thought that going right towards the northern footbridge would be a better idea. After a few minutes, I realized I'd made an error. Not only was this way slightly longer, but it was also totally silent, with a playing field to my right and a small wood to the left of the path. I had one headphone in and was listening to a podcast quietly to cheer me along, but I got so unnerved that I took the earbud out so I could better listen to any real-world noises. I should point out that I grew up on the side of a forested valley and spent my youth playing, camping, and exploring forests, so they are a second home to me, and I know their sounds well. After about 5 minutes of walking along the wide, curving path, I took a routine peek behind me and spotted someone behind me. They were quite a way back at that point, and I could have easily blotted them out with my thumb. Usually, this wouldn't have unnerved me, but they had their hoods up and were walking with an unusual gait, as if they had something wrong with their spine or legs. I reasoned it was probably one of the city's homeless populations, and if he had issues walking, he wasn't going to catch up with me. I didn't even know if he could see me, as I was in a much darker part of the park. As I continued walking, though, he seemed to keep pace and even gained slightly on me. Every time I turned around, I could see his head bobbing with an unusual gait. Weirdly, and I'm not sure if this was due to the darkness, my eyesight, or just the way I remembered it, but he looked like a cliché hunchback from an old Hammer horror movie. He was creeping me out now, and I wondered if he was high, and that's why he was staggering, so I pulled an old trick. I used a lot to escape forest weirdos as a child and enter the woods. I knew about 5 or 6 feet into the trees I would be near invisible. I went 10 just in case and crouched into a bush, donning my navy-colored face mask and putting my hood up to mimic my high albedo, pasty Celtic skin showing up on the road. After a couple of minutes, I heard him approach, grunting as he struggled to move his body. Illuminated only by the moonlight, he got to where I had vanished, which coincided with a bend that would have temporarily obscured me from view when I slipped into the woods. My thought was that if he was following me, he might give up now. I did at this point feel kind of bad that if he were a man with a disability walking home, my disappearance might also have scared him that I had done exactly what I was doing at that moment. That said, there had been enough weird crimes during lockdown for me to be primarily thinking of my own safety, At least I knew I wasn't going to attack him. I waited for a few minutes, and after passing my hiding place for a few meters, he stopped and looked around him. He was breathing heavily, and I got my first decent look at him. He was still obscured and sort of low-res from my vantage point, but I could make out that he was hunched over and wearing a ducking black cloak or blanket and not a coat and hoodie as I had assumed. At this point, I had convinced myself, for my sanity's sake, that he was some prankster looking to scare me, so I remained motionless and waited. It reminded me of the scene from The Lord of the Rings where the hobbits are hiding from the ring wraiths and Frodo is tempted to put the ring on, except the trembling ring in this scene was connected to my bowels. After a couple of seconds of searching, he decided to turn back the way he came. I really hoped that this joker wasn't some disabled homeless guy, and I'd made him take a detour, but I wasn't going to let him follow me either. I waited, watching him until he was out of sight, but I could not hear him going. He emerged quietly from the bushes. If he were near where I had first spotted him now, a bend in the road and distance in the darkness would totally obscure him. I trotted along the road, checking over my shoulder occasionally, until I reached the final boss level of the shortcut, the part of the path now lined by trees on both sides. Glancing over my shoulder one more time before I entered this darker, creepier part of the path, my heart sank when I saw the hunchback once again behind me. It seemed impossible that he would have caught up unless he had pulled the same trick on me. He was moving quickly now in a sort of lopsided gallop, grunting and wheezing loudly. I felt like I could take him in a fight but had no idea what was concealed under his blanket, so I started to jog. I was scared of going too fast as the path was uneven, and if I fell and sprained my ankle, he would be on me in no time. Luckily, the enclosed wooded area wasn't that wide, so I was quickly on the path next to the river. Sprinting towards the footbridge, which spans the river just above a weir. Behind me, the hunchback stopped and let out a long mournful cry that turned my blood to ice, half moan, half howl, weirdly animalistic. Once I reached the other side of the river, I was on open playing fields, not far from home. A young couple had been making out on a bench and leapt to their feet when they saw me coming. The guy asked me, "What the duck was that?" I shook my head and said, "I don't know, some psycho or something, I wouldn't stick around." They got up and quickly went off down the riverside path. I looked back one last time for a split second before he melted into the darkness of the woods before I turned around and sprinted the rest of the way home. Several months later, I feel my brain has done a number on me, making him seem hazy and non-corporeal, almost in my mind. Since then, there have been a weird spike of bad incidents in the park, including an assault, a murder, a man who asks people if he can drink their piss after dark, and a devastating act of vandalism whereby several trees were cut down and park facilities destroyed by a gang of organized vandals. I didn't really think of it at the time, but one of the weirdest things about this all is that the Weir crossing is called Black Weir, and I entered a part of the park called Blackfriars because it was once the site of a Dominican religious order monastery. Whatever was happening, yours truly is not going back at night again. Back in 2004, I was staying at a cabin in West Virginia, which I had visited many times before. I arrived a day before my friends, and when it turned dark, I decided to hike to a little waterfall and thought to take some pictures of the fall and skies for my then GF. On my walk back to the cabin, I heard a noise behind me and turned around to catch a glimpse of a figure in dark clothing dash behind a tree. I waited for flashlight to be pinned to this tree for a couple of seconds, then took out my pistol and announced that I had a gun. Nothing. Then I started to walk backwards for roughly 20 yards and then sprinted. Well, I didn't want to lead anyone back to the cabin, so I took a path that I knew looped close to where it was after 1.5 miles. After about what seemed like forever, I slowed down to catch my breath. I turned around again and again to find nothing. When I arrived back at the cabin, I found the door cracked open. I then ran to my car and booked it at the nearest motel, roughly an hour away, and called my friends, saying the trip was off. I never told them what happened, fearing that they would not take me seriously. To this day, that was the scariest SHT I have ever been through, and I still don't know who or what opened that door. The backwoods of North Carolina are full of old, sleeping houses that ought to be torn down. They dream only awful things. I grew up in a very, very small farm town with a population below 150 or so people. I won't name drop the town for obvious reasons, and even if I did, you wouldn't find anything to write home about. There's a caution light and several abandoned buildings, a barely functional gas station that will grossly overcharge you, and that's about it. You go more than half a mile in any direction, and you will officially be outside of the city limits, though there are dozens of people who live in these heavily wooded farmlands who call the town home simply because it's the closest thing in shouting distance. That would be akin to saying that Mars was within shouting distance of Earth. I've had a few experiences in these woods that I cannot fully explain. I can describe them, and I will, but I cannot offer any scientific explanation for them. I know that tales of Wendigos, skinwalkers, and other natural forest demon spooks are popular, but Wendigos are creatures that belong to the tribal legends of tribes centered around the Great Lakes region of the northern United States, Wisconsin, Michigan, and into the eastern coast of Canada. Skinwalkers are exclusively tied to the Navajo religion and Navajo grounds, which are in the deserts of the far west of the United States. Keep that in the back of your mind as you listen to this. I first began to notice the presence when I was around 12 years old. Playing in the woods was really the only pastime I had available to me outside of playing video games, but video games got old rather quickly. I was an only child, and there weren't any other children in the area, so exploring the woods was a beneficial outlet for my imagination. Prior to my first real experience, the spookiest thing in the woods around here would have been a venomous snake. Even then, the snakes we have aren't likely to kill you unless you seriously neglect the wound or have an allergic reaction. Aside from them, the largest predators we have are coyotes, which are mostly afraid of humans, and the rare cougar that happens to be passing through, which is so infrequent that it isn't worth worrying over. So the first day in question was a normal summer day. I was out hiking, collecting rocks, and building forts out of sticks, the standard things a 12-year-old boy does. It was about sundown, and I wasn't quite ready to head home yet when I noticed something was off. During the summer in North Carolina, the woods are anything but quiet. You have a cacophony of sounds, cicadas, crickets, frogs, birds, there's a whole chorus of wildlife that all wants to be heard. Heck, you may even get the occasional coyote pack howling or bobcat screaming. The point of this is that the woods are far from quiet, and sudden silence in the woods in these times is not an accident. But that's precisely what I noticed. All of the noise had stopped. I could hear the wind between the mixture of old growth and pines, and I could hear the distant babbling of a creek, but that was it. This was strange to me, but at the time, I didn't realize what an ill omen it was in and of itself. I actually remember thinking that the water sounded peaceful and walking deeper into the woods to listen to it better. As I did, though, I began to get this overwhelming sense of foreboding. It wasn't the standard I feel like I'm being watched. No, I didn't feel any eyes on me, feel like I was being followed, or experience any of those standard paranoias. No. This was like, have you ever stayed at a party too? You got there at 9, and now it's 2 a.m., and suddenly you realize that you don't know anyone who is still there? You also didn't see this new guy come in, but he's glaring at you, and come to think about it, so was that girl in the kitchen. You've overstayed your welcome, and it's probably time to go. That's exactly what it felt like, even if I lacked the metaphor to express it at the time. The air itself felt heavy. Everything in my mind and body was screaming at me that I needed to leave, that this place was not mine anymore. It had been fine in the morning hours, but now? This was the domain of someone, or something else, and I wasn't welcome. I remember feeling as if the trees were warning me. Leave, or else. So I did. Initially, I walked, but by the time the sun had begun its descent and the sky had begun to darken in the twilight, I was jogging. I never broke into a full-on sprint. I don't know why, but I felt that showing too much fear was a bad idea. Eventually, I made it back to the road and looked back into the woods. I didn't see anything, but that's when the feeling of being watched set in. I felt that there were eyes just beyond the tree line and out of sight, and they were staring right back at mine. I went home and pushed the experience out of my mind as best I could. From then on, I made it a point to always be out of the woods by dark or to have a firearm with me if I knew I was staying later. I should note that several times after that, I wound up in the woods at dusk but did not have this feeling return. There weren't any special circumstances that seemed to summon it, just. Sometimes, things were fine. Others? I all but sprinted for civilization. I didn't have any more overt experiences, however, until years later. I don't know what the catalyst was, but the activity ramped up dramatically in a year's span. The first experience like this was in October of 2018, and since then, the woods have gone from a home for the occasional unsettling experience to a place of actual danger and terror. I went camping with some college friends of mine during the month of October in question. In total, there were just 3 of us, and we were mostly roughing it out. We had a tent, but we chopped our own firewood and all of that jazz. We camped pretty deep in the woods. It was dark by the time we were fully set up and had finished cooking. We ate, and then we proceeded to get very drunk. I don't know how much we actually drank, as we were just sipping out of a handle of vodka and passing it around the campfire as we talked about everything from ghost stories to the more tangible fears in our lives, such as our dating lives and the prospect of post-graduation plans. This went on well into the night, with the stories growing more nonsensical and the laughter growing louder as the bottle grew lighter. By 1:30 a.m. or so, it had grown deathly cold. I decided that was a night for me and that I was going to get into my sleeping bag. The other two weren't ready to sleep yet, and one of my friends, we'll call him Frank, decided he wanted to smoke a cigarette. Meanwhile, the other friend, we'll call him Tim, decided that this was a good time for him to go climb a large rock about 70 or so yards away from the tent. Frank begrudgingly goes to supervise him while he finishes off his cigarette. So they're both a good 70, maybe 80, yards away from the tent. I'm now in my sleeping bag and trying to fall asleep, and I can hear them laughing and talking, and it's obviously far away. It's right at this time that something heavy slams into the side of the tent, like, heavy enough that I'm surprised the tent didn't collapse. I didn't move. I was drunk, but not so drunk as to not realize that whatever was out there didn't stop by to borrow a cup of sugar. That sense of dread filled me at once, and even though I had my shotgun with me, I couldn't bring myself to reach for it. I felt staying still was a safer approach. I heard someone breathing. It wasn't human breathing, though. This was loud and weirdly wet sounding. It wasn't sniffling or anything like that, just deep breathing. This only went on for a total of fewer than 10 seconds, and all at once, it was gone. No footsteps. No banging on the tent. There is no gradual decline in breathing. Packed up and left immediately. This last experience is the most recent and the most intense. There was a meteor shower not too long ago, and I returned to the clearing where my friends and I went camping to observe it, as there is very little light pollution there. It was stellar, and I loved every second of it, but I wasn't out there long when my dog, I brought him with me, he's good company, started acting strange. He had pinned his hair back while lying down and was now staring very intently at the tree line. He wasn't barking or growling, he was silent and just watching. It was strange, but I assumed he'd caught wind of a deer or other prey animal and was on the hunt, though he was far too lazy to actually go chase it. After a moment, a nearby coyote howled. I felt a wave of relief, as my dog's behavior was beginning to make me uneasy. He was just tense because of the coyote, but it would pass. There was something wrong, though. First, coyotes hunt in packs. It's extremely uncommon for a solo coyote to hunt and howl like this. Second, my dog had begun to whimper now and was shying back to the edge of the truck as though he were afraid. And the coyote was drawing closer, it seemed. My brain began connecting a lot of dots. The woods were silent, that feeling had returned, I was in the same spot as the last encounter, and then I registered the sound of branches breaking. Coyotes aren't heavy enough to do that, I thought. And the second I did, as though whatever was out there had waited for me to realize it, the coyote stopped pretending to be one. Or at least, I don't know. It stopped howling. It then erupted into the most horrible sound I have ever heard. The coyote was laughing. It wasn't a hyena sort of laugh, though. It was this garbled, mangled mess of sound that sounded like an animal trying and doing a piss-poor job to impersonate the cadence of human laughter, and it was on this recording track where after every fourth laugh it seemed to loop. It was rapidly growing louder over the sound of breaking branches. I frantically jumped up, grabbed my dog, and fumbled for my truck keys to get out of there. As I tried to get my keys and get my door open, the laughter stopped only for this guttural and deep scream to resound from the forest. I say deep to emphasize that it wasn't a bobcat or fox. They have high-pitched sounds. This was very low. It had the same pitch as, say, a roar, but it was in that same horribly botched nonsense that the laugh was in. Of course, the laughter resumed immediately, but as I got in my truck and turned the lights on, there was dead silence. In a moment of stupid bravado and curiosity, I turned my truck towards the tree line before I left to shine my headlights and see if I saw anything. Between the trees, I saw what appeared to be a man. He was of average height, wearing a white t-shirt and, I assume, blue jeans, though I could not see a face, arms, or anything of that nature, just his silhouette and his clothes. In hindsight, I think he was only a silhouette, maybe. I blinked, and he was gone. That's my story. I don't know what is in the backwoods of North Carolina. I don't want to know, and it's probably best you don't try to find out. It doesn't seem too welcoming to strangers. My boyfriend and I decided to go to a secluded hot spring in Idaho. It was March, but there was still a lot of snow on the ground. The hike was only 2 miles long, but the warm, humid air made the ground incredibly slick and treacherous. We weren't going to let that stop us. We got to the hot springs and got naked, soaked, drank wine, smoked weed, etc. We were there for several hours with not another soul in sight. We figured the ground was too treacherous for anyone to try to hike in. Suddenly, we both spot a guy walking up towards the hot springs. We figured he would get in, and we would leave. Instead, he climbed up to where we were sitting and started asking us questions like, "Have you seen any deer or animals?" We said no and that if he wanted to get in, we would leave. He would not leave and just kept staring at me. I was still naked. We started getting really uncomfortable, and my boyfriend was getting prepared to fight this guy. My boyfriend had a knife, but it was in his backpack, which was several feet away. Finally, the guy turned away and left, leaving us to quickly get dressed and hike back out. We still had the uneasy feeling of being watched. In addition, it was not hunting season, nor did this guy have a gun or look like he was prepared for hunting. I honestly thought I was going to be raped and my boyfriend was going to be murdered. We were both thinking of ways to get out of the situation and how it could have turned out really badly. For my 30th birthday, I rented the caretaker's cottage at the haunted Myrtle Plantation in St. Francisville, Louisiana. I'm glad we did, because if you sleep in the house, they lock you in at night. Other than my parents, who went to sleep, there was only one other couple in the house, an older couple. Since we couldn't go explore the house, we explored the grounds. I had bought a digital recorder so we could try to catch EVPs. We asked a lot of questions and walked all around the property. Not too much was really happening. At one point, when we were just talking amongst ourselves, a rock was thrown in between us and hit the wall of the porch we were sitting on. Okay, that was weird. About 30 minutes later, we were sitting on a different porch, and it happened again. Not wanting to scare her, we laughed it off. Another strange thing that happened was that when we were trying to get EVPs by asking questions, all of a sudden her right arm and leg were bristled with goosebumps, and while I was sitting next to her, my left arm and leg were too. Like it was between us. I asked whoever was doing it if they could touch my right leg, and I extended it, and the goosebumps of electricity traveled across us and enveloped my leg. I thanked it, and we thought it was so cool. Hours passed and not much happened, so we walked around some more. All of a sudden, about 50 feet away, we see this person dancing, like swaying their hips and flailing their arms. We just froze and stared. After about 5 minutes of this, we got a little braver and moved in closer, still dancing. Eventually, I quietly said, "Hey, hey, hey." We walked closer and closer until we realized it was just an angel statue. But we both saw it dancing. So me and my infinite wisdom said, "Hey, let's use my tarot cards and see what that was." Well, as I started laying the spread, I pulled every negative card for each position: death, destruction, and hate. So I stopped and put them up. Freaked out, we went back towards the house. We just hung around and talked until the sun came up. So around 8 a.m., with the sun bright and high in the sky, I said, "Let's take a last walk around the property." Stupid me said aloud, "We're about to leave, so if you're going to do anything, you should do it now." Not the best idea. So we happened across this white, one-man bridge that went over a creek we hadn't noticed before that night, thank God, and we walked across it. Just as I was about to step off the last bit onto the grass, I was looking 90 degrees to my right along a tree line, and I saw a dog lying down. It wasn't just black, it was like a cutout of time. Blacker than black. As my eyes scanned left, there was another tree and another black dog, the same as the one before, but he was standing facing me. Then another tree, another larger animal. I kept scanning to my left, and between each tree was an animal shape larger than the last one. Perhaps between 10 and 15 of them. I'm not sure the second to last animal shape, but I remember that he was now directly in front of me and was like 6 feet tall in the shape of a tiger or something. Then I saw him. He was like 10 feet tall, he was as wide as 3 men, his arms went past his knees, he was also blacker than any earthly black, and he was bowed up like he was mad. His head must have been jutted forward, because it was just a semicircle with no neck. I just stood there, frozen. I guess I was trying to make sense of what the duck I was looking at. I was trying to look for a face, but there wasn't one. It seemed I was looking into his empty face forever. Then suddenly, 2 sideways wispy smoke-like forms appeared where the eyes should be, and just as quickly, they popped into perfect circles. The only way I can describe what they looked like is when you look at a bubble and you see the rainbow shifting and swirling. It was like that, but shining silver and black swirling. When I saw him, it was like he was broadcasting the eyed how to describe it. It wasn't like out loud in my head, but I understood it perfectly. If it wasn't for blank, I would be ducking you up right now like exactly in those words, but the blank like was censored. Maybe because I was saved, or maybe it was the stupid pre-written protection prayer we said aloud when we got there. I doubt that one. Maybe it was against his rules. At that moment, I snapped out of it and ran. We packed and left. The weird thing is that the week after I got home, every night between 2 and 3 a.m., I would wake up in dread with something tapping at my window. The last night it happened, I woke up with fear I've never felt before and screamed out, "Jesus." And I saw a human shape run across my second-story bedroom windows. I have never seen a shadow come across there in 12 years. The only way I got it to stop was by burning my tarot cards, repenting, and renouncing myself for opening myself up to those cards. This was the very next day. I used to sit and converse with those cards by myself. The funny thing is, the cards warned me about going, saying it would affect my mental state. You think? So this is a true story, and it took place around September to October 2016. I was studying at a language school in Los Angeles for a few months, and I had moved around a lot because the school didn't really provide the housing that I and a lot of other students were promised. Because of this, I, a 23-year-old Swedish girl, and another guy from Sweden that I met at the school decided to rent an apartment together since we were going to live in LA for a while. Being under 25, we had a hard time finding somewhere to live, but after making a lot of calls, someone in Palos Verdes, a place outside of LA, was willing to rent us the upper floor of one of his houses. We rented it fully furnished with Wi-Fi, etc. If you've never been to PV, I can tell you that it's a part of the Los Angeles area, and it's located on top of a really big hill or mountain, so there's a lot of forest, barely cell reception, and a lot of wild animals. It's also a really expensive area, so the houses are huge. So we got there with our stuff, and we met the couple that were renting the first floor, which contained the garage, kitchen, 1 bedroom and bathroom, and 1 living room. They entered their apartment through the garage door, and we entered ours through the main entrance, so we didn't see each other. They were super nice, a young couple who worked out of town and spent the rest of their days on the beach, so they weren't home a lot. The second floor contained 2 bedrooms with big closets and a bathroom each, a living room, and another bedroom made into a kitchen, which wasn't really a kitchen but more of a room where we could store food and use a microwave. There were also, of course, all the big, old, haunted houses with them, a master bedroom with a massive bathroom and 2 big closets. But we weren't allowed to go in there because the owner lived there from time to time when the house wasn't lived in by someone else. So there were locks on the door, and he put post-it notes on them with no entry, no access, and not allowed. We were in the top class at school, so we understood what he meant when he said we weren't allowed in there, so there really wasn't any use for this. The first couple of days went by great. We explored the neighborhood in PV. My housemate had a car, so we just went everywhere and saw everything easily. Then a couple of days of let's stay at home. It's boring outside and we've seen everything already, plus I don't like the sun, which is when we noticed that we weren't really alone. At first, it wasn't like meeting someone in the hallway or hearing someone scream out of nowhere, it was more subtle. We were watching a movie together the first time, and we heard something that sounded like a knock on the front door, so my friend hurried to the window in the living room that overlooked the door, but of course no one was there, so we started watching the movie again, and we heard a sound from the hallway. You know that sound where there really isn't a sound, but you kind of hear the something is off, it's not supposed to sound like that sound? That one. We both froze. And then, out of nowhere, the sound of rubber balls being bounced around in the hallway. We could see that there were none, so we tried to blame it on something logical, which we really couldn't. A couple of more times over a week or so, this happened. Not only the rubber ball sound, but we just got the feeling that something was wrong in the apartment and that we weren't supposed to be there. And then it got worse. One night, my friend hurried into my room, whispering, "Have you seen anyone walk by your room?" "No, of course not," I answered. I want to add that the apartment was shaped like an L, so in one part my bedroom plus bath, master bedroom plus bath, and living room were located, and in the other part were my friend's bed plus bath, the kitchen, and the stairs leading to the front door. He told me to be quiet, and we walked through the hallway to the front door. It was open, too. Completely fully opened. He had noticed it when his bedroom door had flown open, and he thought it was me. We closed the very heavy front door, which we knew we had locked, and looked through the apartment. Nothing was found, obviously. This happened a couple of times after that. During our stay, the power in the neighborhood went out 3 times, as well as 2 times when I lived there alone. So I got kind of used to it. Everything would be silent all of a sudden, and then the alarm would beep for half an hour to tell us that we didn't have any electricity. This also meant no internet and no cell reception, and at night it meant no light at all since we lived on a hill with no street lights on it. A handyman came to fix something in the apartment one day, and then he showed me the master bedroom. And it was amazing. Huge bed, fireplace for some reason since it never got cold in LA, and the bathroom had a big jacuzzi in it. So, naturally, after having a major fight with the landlord, we broke in and took a bath, and everything went fine. We left everything the way we found it and left no trace at all. But I'm pretty sure that the house was mad at us after that, because that's when things really took off. We started to wake up feeling like someone had been staring at us. The rubber ball sound was more intense than ever, My room didn't have electricity for a week for no reason known to man. 2 electricians looked it up but didn't find anything. The fridge was open, the door was open, and the car battery had died. It was just constant weirdness everywhere in the apartment during the rest of the stay. A month of this shit went by, and I was furious. We paid a lot of money for this apartment, and the landlord was telling us both different things when we talked to him, which is why we ended up in the master bathroom, BTW, and he was always checking up on us to see if we studied hard and that everything was okay in the apartment. He'd drop by unannounced and want to see our grades from time to time, and when we showed them to him, he gave us money, which is a really weird thing to do if you don't know anyone and just rent your apartment through a site online. We were so tired of him and so tired of the apartment telling us to leave. Finally, my friend left. I went to graduation day alone because his bedroom door was locked, so I didn't bother waking him up. During the day, he texted and asked if I was in school, and I said that I wasn't, just so he wouldn't ask me to get his stuff on the way home. I was mad because I had to get to school by myself because we had made a lot of plans for the last day of school, which I nearly missed by waiting for him. An hour went by, and I exited the school building with another friend, and in the parking lot, I saw my friend with his car driving by. I saw that he had his bags with him, but he didn't notice me. The thing is that we only had one key to the apartment. And when one of us left the apartment, we had a place to put the key so the other one would find it. I texted him and asked if he had locked the door when he left, and he said that he hadn't because I was still home, according to him. I rushed home from school and found the front door open, all of the lights turned on, windows open, doors open, besides the master bedroom one, fans and TV still turned on, and the key was still in the place where we used to keep it. He stopped contacting me after that, and I couldn't get a hold of him to ask him why he left so suddenly. So this was on a Friday, and all of my friends left on Saturday, and I was going to stay for another 9 days alone after that. Unfortunately enough, I got really sick those last couple of days. I was throwing up a lot, and both my back and my stomach hurt like hell, making it basically unbearable to move. Besides the fact that I felt sick, this wasn't all that big of a deal since I spent most of my days sitting at my computer anyway. I had almost gotten used to the noise now. After all, we've lived there for 10 weeks already. So then, on Monday, after he had left, I heard this strange sound from the front door. It sounded like scratching at first, but then it started to sound like someone trying to break their way in through the door with a crowbar, and I just sat paralyzed on the couch. Then the sound of the front door opening came. It was a very soft thud, and I knew that someone was inside. I rushed in my very sickened state to the living room door, closing and locking it, and then rushing to my phone again. I immediately called the landlord to tell him that someone was inside the apartment and that I didn't know what to do. I'm a very small, weak girl, so if someone were to try something, I would probably not put up that much of a fight. He answers, "No, you're wrong, it's a very safe neighborhood," and then hangs up. I had now positioned myself on the floor right in front of the living room door, pushing down so I could see underneath the door if someone was walking this way. Absolute silence. Then the loud beep from the alarm goes off, and I realize that my landlord didn't hang up on me. The power was out, and so was the phone. I was in that position for an hour. I didn't go to the bathroom even though I needed to. I didn't unlock the door in front of me, and I had only gotten up to check if the couple downstairs were home, but their cars were missing, so I was all alone in this big house without any way to defend myself or contact anyone. After an hour, I thought that it was safe to go outside since I couldn't stay on the floor for the rest of the stay. So I get up, and as soon as I do, I hear the rubber balls. Those damn non-existing rubber balls. I get down on the floor again and start to look out into the hallway, and it gets quiet again. Another 5 minutes like this, and then one of the worst things in my life happens. Something starts to knock on the door half a meter in front of my face. Too loud, manly knocks on the door. I just feel tears running down my face, and I sit there in complete shock, now realizing that everything we experienced in that apartment was true, even though we tried to convince ourselves otherwise. The power came back about 2-3 minutes after that, which was good because my phone was about to die any second, and I called the couple from downstairs. One of them rushed home to check up on me, and we both went through the apartment together. Obviously, we found nothing. After this, the presence took on a new strategy to make me go insane. I called my mom every time I left my bedroom, even when I just went to the bathroom. I started to carry a knife with me everywhere, because, let's face it, out of everything that couldn't hurt a ghost, a knife would be the least useless thing. I played loud music to cover up the sound, and I went to bed with the lights on. Everywhere. I never turned them off. So, naturally, the presence started to do that for me. Some mornings I woke up with my bedroom door, which I always locked, unlocked. Some days it was a little bit open, and some days it was fully opened. Some days the lights were on, and some days they weren't. Sometimes the showers turned on when I wasn't in the room, and in that case, they were going to have to stay on until I called the couple downstairs. The last day of this insane stay of constant terror, I talked to the couple downstairs for a while. We were of course not in the house talking about the house since I don't want to die, and the girl finally told me the same thing. They had lived there just 2 weeks more than we had, and they felt awful as soon as they packed up their stuff. Things were moving around, turning on and off, and they heard loud noises from upstairs. We say goodbye, and I go back inside, check my stuff one last time, and then get into bed, and then I hear the printer from my friend's old room turn on. And it starts to print something. After what sounded like 5 fully written pieces of paper, it turns off again, and I play my music and try to sleep. The landlord met me and drove me to the airport the day after. I was so ready to go home. When he dropped me off, I asked him to check if the printer had printed anything last night, which he found odd, but seeing as he was going back anyway to get ready for the new guests, he said he would look into it. And after a while, I got a text saying, 5 blank papers, did you do this? I know it's very poorly written, which I apologize for. I still feel awful about my stay, and I wake up from nightmares about the place and the knocks on the door. It feels like I've been through an emotional war with myself, trying to understand what happened. I haven't been able to contact my friend, he's blocked me everywhere, and the last thing I've heard from him is that he's really sure about me being home on graduation day. He knew that he heard and saw me being home. The couple contacted me as I arrived at the airport back home, letting me know that it was worse than ever and that they decided to move out as well. So now I'm sitting at home, a month later, still feeling as sick as I did those last days, and I'm slowly starting to think that I'm expecting Rosemary's baby. I'm never going to break into someone else's bedroom again, and I will never recover from the sound of those damn rubber balls. In my senior year of college, I lived with 3 of my best girlfriends in a house just off campus. 2 of our male friends also lived in the home, but in a separate basement apartment. Everything was super chill. Until it wasn't. It started out pretty low-key, and I was the only one experiencing anything. I'd hear whispers in the walls and soft footsteps on the stairs at night, and at first, I literally thought I was losing my mind. The way the house was laid out, 1 girl slept in a room near the bottom of the stairs, 1 girl slept in the room just at the top of the stairs, and my room was across from her room, also just at the top of the stairs, and then another girl was down the hall from both of us. It being our senior year and all of us having pretty big personalities, it wasn't long until we started fighting for whatever reason or another, but some of them got pretty intense, and it seemed like the more we fought, the stranger things kept getting. My cat would stare out of my cracked door at night, growling. The footsteps on the stairs got noticeably louder, and there were 2 sets of them, a heavy set and a light set, and they would go up and down, for hours. A few times, I heard a girl crying from down the hall, and thinking it was my friend, I'd go in to check on her, only to realize she wasn't home. Everyone in the house besides me was a super heavy sleeper, and they all thought I was being extra anytime I'd say anything about any of this. However, the fights between us all kept getting worse, and the activity kept escalating. One time our guy friends from downstairs had been up with us on the outside porch just chit-chatting and made a joke about how much noise we had made earlier in the day. All of us girls were there and asked them what they meant, and they said it sounded like we were dragging a body across the floor. We asked them what time they heard this, and they stated a time when absolutely none of us had been in the home. They said they'd heard it a few times here or there but just thought we'd been moving things around. We assured them we hadn't moved anything around since we moved in and got settled. And then, finally, one night, with the footsteps being especially annoying, I got a text from the girl sleeping at the bottom of the stairs saying that she heard them. Her boyfriend and she shared a dog, and the dog was sleeping over with us that night, and she said the dog was staring out of her room with its fur standing up and making low barks. And slowly, everyone in the house started hearing the footsteps at night. It became such a regular thing that it even stopped surprising any of us. It happened so frequently. And then the night came, when the girl who lived down the hall and I got into our biggest fight. There was yelling, screaming, accusations, and just all-out bad energy all around, and we both stormed off to our rooms at the end of it and shut our doors. It was just her and me in the house that night. Not even 15 minutes passed until I heard the footsteps on the stairs, but this time they were so loud and heavy, rushing up the steps. She texts me and asks me what I'm doing, and I tell her I'm still in my room. The movement is so loud that we are both afraid that maybe someone is in the house with us. I hear the footsteps retreat back down the steps with loud thumps and creaks, and then there was a pause for maybe 5-10 seconds until we both heard a crash of what sounded like pans knocking together, and then another loud crash and heavy thump. We both screamed and ran out of our rooms, me holding a wine bottle, lol, College weapons, I guess? And her calling campus security. I yelled down the staircase that we had weapons and were calling the police, and we were met with absolute silence. We waited a few minutes and calmed down and continued listening, and when we didn't hear anything, we went downstairs to check on the house. Knowing the other two girls would be out for the night, I locked all of the doors when I got home that evening. We had a front door and a kitchen door. The kitchen door was never, ever used. When we got to the kitchen, everything looked as it should be, except the kitchen door was wide open, the screen door was open, and the wall showed the force with which the door had slammed into it. It was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, and the footsteps and weirdness continued until we moved out of that freaking house. We did research out the wazoo on that house, and there's no reason as to why it should have had any of that energy in it that we could find, but it certainly was there. This is just one of a few real-life spooky ghost stories I have, but definitely the scariest.